At my wife's funeral, no one came but me. My children chose parties over their mother's goodbye. The next morning, I walked into the bank and dissolved the family trust fund. And what happened next shocked everyone. If you have ever felt the sting of betrayal from the people you raised, please hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from, because this story is about to travel further than my ungrateful children ever did. My name is Elijah Freeman. I am 74 years old, and I stood alone in the freezing Atlanta rain. The sky was a sheet of unrelenting gray, matching the granite headstones that stretched out in every direction. In front of me, a mahogany casket with bronze handles was being lowered slowly into the wet earth. Inside was Ruby, my Ruby, the woman who had held my hand when we had nothing but a dream and a used cement mixer, the woman who had stayed by my side for 50 years. I looked to my left, empty chairs. I looked to my right, empty chairs. I had paid for 30 chairs to be set up under the canopy, expecting friends, neighbors, and most importantly, family. But the only person standing there besides me was the Reverend Thomas, a man whose knees were shaking from the cold and perhaps from the sheer awkwardness of the situation. The wind whipped against my black overcoat, cutting through to my bones, but the cold I felt inside was far worse. It was a hollowness that echoed. Where were they? Where was Marcus? Where was Jasmine? My hand, trembling slightly, not from age but from a rage I was trying to suppress, reached into my pocket. I felt the vibration against my chest. It wasn't a call. It was a notification. A relentless buzzing that felt like an insect trying to burrow into my heart. I pulled out my smartphone. Ruby always hated these things, said they were distractions, but today it was my window into the truth. I looked at the screen. It was a fraud alert from the bank. $5,000, authorized at the Sapphire Club, Las Vegas, Nevada. I stared at the number. $5,000. That was more than my father made in a year when I was a boy, and it had been spent in a single second on a card I had given my son for emergencies. Apparently, a VIP table at a nightclub counted as an emergency on the day of his mother's funeral. I didn't put the phone away. I unlocked it. I needed to see it. I needed to see the disrespect with my own eyes. I opened Instagram. I had created an account under a fake name months ago just to keep track of them. There it was. The answer was glowing on the screen in high definition. Marcus, my 42-year-old son, was live streaming. The location tag read Vegas. The video showed him holding a bottle of champagne that cost more than the suit I was wearing. He was laughing, his eyes glassy, surrounded by people who didn't know his name, shouting over the thumping bass of club music. No mention of his mother. No black tie. Just a silk shirt unbuttoned to his chest and a grin that made my stomach turn. I swiped the screen. Jasmine, my baby girl, my 35-year-old daughter, a photo posted 2 hours ago. She was wearing a white bikini, her legs stretched out on a lounge chair overlooking a turquoise ocean. The caption read, "Finally some me time, weekend recharge, recharge." She was recharging while her mother was being lowered into the mud 6 feet under. I looked at the timestamp. She had posted it right as the hearse pulled into the cemetery. I put the phone back in my pocket. I didn't cry. I think I ran out of tears 3 days ago when Ruby took her last breath in the hospital room, holding my hand, asking where the children were. I had lied to her then. I told her they were on their way, that the flights were delayed due to weather. I let her die with a lie of comfort rather than the truth of their abandonment. Reverend Thomas cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Freeman," he said, his voice gentle, cautious. "Should we wait a few more minutes? Perhaps the traffic is bad." I looked at the Reverend. He was a good man, but he didn't know my children. Traffic didn't stop you from Las Vegas or Cabo. Traffic didn't force you to spend $5,000 on vodka and sparklers while your mother was being buried. "No, Reverend," I said, my voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Ruby waited for them her whole life. She waited for them to call. She waited for them to visit. She waited for them to grow up. Do not make her wait any more. Proceed." The service was short. The rain fell harder, drumming against the casket lid like 1,000 fingers tapping impatiently. When it was done, the workers stepped forward to fill the grave. I held up a hand to stop them. "Give me the shovel," I commanded. "Sir, that is not necessary," one of the workers said, looking at my polished shoes and my gray hair. "You are grieving. Give me the shovel." I took the heavy tool in my hands. The wood was slick with rain. I shoveled the first mound of wet, heavy dirt onto the mahogany. The sound was a dull thud that felt like a heartbeat stopping. I did it again and again. My shoulders burned. My breath came in short white puffs in the cold air. But I didn't stop. I filled that grave myself. I buried my wife alone because I was the only one who truly loved her. When I finally walked away, my expensive shoes were caked in mud. My hands were blistered. I got into my old beat-up sedan. It was a 2010 model rusting at the wheel wells. I had driven it for years to maintain the illusion. You see, my children thought I was just a retired construction foreman living on a meager pension and Social Security. They saw the peeling paint on my house and the coupons I clipped on Sundays. They didn't know about the $18 million sitting in diversified trust funds. They didn't know that 15 years ago I didn't just retire. I sold my infrastructure company, the one that built half the highways in this state, for a fortune. I hid it. I hid it because I wanted them to make their own way. I wanted them to hunger for success, not for my handouts. But looking at the empty cemetery, looking at the notifications on my phone, I realized my mistake. I hadn't raised lions. I had raised vultures, and vultures only circle when they smell death. I sat in the driver's seat, the rain hammering against the roof. I took my phone out one last time. I looked at the fraud alert. "Do you approve this transaction?" the text message asked. "Yes or no?" I typed no. Then I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang twice. "Vance," I said when the voice answered. Elijah, the voice on the other end, was rough, surprised. "I heard about Ruby. I am so sorry. I was going to come to the wake, but I didn't think—" "Save it, Vance," I interrupted. "I am at the cemetery. They didn't show up." There was a silence on the line, a heavy, understanding silence. Vance was my old war buddy, my lawyer, the only man who knew where all the bodies were buried and where all the money was hidden. "What do you want to do?" Eli Vance asked, his tone shifting from friend to attorney. I looked out the windshield at the fresh mound of dirt covering my wife. I thought about Marcus in Vegas. I thought about Jasmine in Cabo. I thought about Brad, that son-in-law of mine who called me Pops with a sneer every time he thought I wasn't looking. "Execute Protocol Omega," I said. Vance sucked in a breath. "Eli, are you sure?" "That is the nuclear option. Once we pull that trigger, everything freezes. The accounts, the trusts, the assets, they will be cut off. Completely." "I am sure," I said. My voice didn't waver. "They made their choice. Now I am making mine. Freeze it all. Every dime. And Vance, get the paperwork ready. I am coming to your office tomorrow. We are rewriting the will." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel sad anymore. The grief was still there, heavy and wet, like the dirt on my shoes, but it was being pushed down by something hotter, something sharper. I started the engine of my old car. It coughed and sputtered before roaring to life. I drove out of the cemetery gates, leaving my wife in peace and driving straight into a war. As I turned onto the highway, heading back to the empty house that Marcus and Jasmine probably thought they would be selling next week, I felt a strange sense of calm. They thought I was a senile old man, a relic of the past. They thought they could dance on my grave while I was still breathing. They were about to find out that the architect wasn't done building yet. But this time, I wasn't building a legacy for them. I was building a trap, and they had already walked right into it. 3 days of silence followed the funeral. 3 days where the only sound in the house was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the settling of the timber beams I had installed with my own hands 40 years ago. I sat in the dark, waiting. I knew they would come. Grief does not stop greed, it only accelerates it. On the third morning, the silence was shattered, not by a knock, but by the sound of a key turning in the lock. They did not wait for me to open the door. They did not call to ask if I was decent. They simply walked in as if they already owned the place. It was my son Marcus, my daughter Jasmine, and her husband Brad. I was sitting in the kitchen drinking my black coffee, watching them through the doorway. Brad led the pack. He was a tall man with a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror and eyes that never stayed still. He was a high-end real estate agent who sold glass boxes to tech millionaires, and he walked into my home with the arrogance of a man surveying a teardown. He didn't take his shoes off. That might seem like a small thing to some, but in this house, Etta ran a tight ship. You left the world at the door. But Brad, with his Italian leather loafers, walked right onto the pristine beige carpet in the living room. I saw the mud from the garden cling to the fabric. He didn't even look down. "It smells like the past in here," Brad said, wrinkling his nose as if he had smelled something rotten. "It has that old people smell. You know what I mean, Jasmine. It smells like stagnation." Jasmine, my baby girl, was busy tapping on her phone, barely looking up. "Yeah, it is pretty musty," she muttered. "We should probably open the windows, get some fresh air in here before we assess the inventory." Inventory, that is what she called her mother's life. Brad walked over to the wall and tapped his knuckle against the plaster. "Solid," he said, "but the layout is ancient. This land, though, the land is the real gold mine. If we leveled this place, knocked down this heap of nostalgia, we could put up 2, maybe 3 modern townhomes. The zoning in this neighborhood is changing. We are sitting on a lottery ticket, folks." I gripped my coffee mug so hard my knuckles turned the color of ash. Leveled. He wanted to level it. He didn't know. He couldn't know. 40 years ago, I didn't just buy this house. I built it. I was a young man then, strong as an ox, working 14-hour days at the construction site and then coming here at night. I laid every single brick of that fireplace he was leaning against. I mixed the mortar by hand in the backyard. I framed the walls while Etta brought me lemonade and wiped the sweat from my brow. This wasn't just wood and plaster. This house was the physical manifestation of my sweat, my blood, and my love for my wife. It was built to last 100 years, not to be scraped away by a son-in-law who had never calloused his hands in his life. I stood up, slowly letting my joints pop. I wanted them to hear me. I walked into the living room, my gait slow, my posture slightly hunched. I had to play the part. "Hello, Pops," Brad said, turning around. He always called me Pops. It wasn't affectionate. It was diminutive. It was a way of reminding me that I was old and he was the alpha in the room. We were just talking about updates. I looked at the mud on his shoes. I looked at Marcus, who was avoiding my eyes, looking at the ceiling. I looked at Jasmine, who was checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice raspy. "We want to help you, Dad," Marcus said, finally stepping forward. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, likely from a hangover or the stress of the debts I knew he was drowning in. "We know you are struggling. Mom did everything. We can't expect you to maintain a place this size. It is irresponsible of us to leave you here alone." Brad reached into his briefcase and pulled out a glossy folder. He placed it on the coffee table right on top of Etta's favorite lace doily. "We found a solution," Pops Brad said, flashing that shark smile. "It is called Sunny Days Senior Living. It is a fantastic facility. Top tier. They have full medical staff, recreational activities, 3 meals a day. It is like a cruise ship that never leaves the dock." I looked at the brochure. The colors were bright, the font was cheerful. But I knew Sunny Days. I knew the owner. I had done business with him years ago when I was running my company. He was a crook who cut corners on everything from food quality to heating bills. It wasn't a cruise ship. It was a warehouse for the elderly, a place where families dumped their burdens to be sedated and forgotten. It was the cheapest facility in the state despite the fancy brochure. "You want me to live there?" I asked, feigning confusion. "It is for your own safety," Jasmine chimed in, walking over and placing a hand on my shoulder. Her touch felt cold. "You are 74, Daddy. You are forgetting things. The other day you didn't answer the phone. We were worried sick. This place, they can watch you. They can make sure you are okay. They weren't worried about my safety. They were worried about how fast they could liquidate my assets. If I was in a home, the house would be empty. If the house was empty, they could sell it." Brad tapped the folder. "The waiting list is long, Pops. But I pulled some strings. I know people. We can get you a room by the end of the week, but we need to move fast. We need to get the paperwork signed so we can list this place and use the equity to cover your entrance fees." He was lying. The entrance fee for Sunny Days was minimal. The equity in this house was massive. The difference would go straight into their pockets. I looked at them. 3 vultures in designer clothes picking at the bones of a lion they thought was dead. I felt a surge of rage so hot I thought it would burn through my skin. I wanted to grab Brad by his collar and throw him through the front window. I wanted to tell them about the $18 million. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. A lion does not roar when he is stalking. He waits. I let my hand tremble. I reached for the glass of water sitting on the side table. I made sure my grip was weak. I lifted it halfway to my mouth, then let my fingers spasm. The glass fell. It shattered against the hardwood floor, water splashing onto Brad's expensive trousers. "Damn it!" Brad shouted, jumping back. I shrank into myself, making my shoulders slump. "I am sorry," I stammered, making my voice sound thin and fearful. "I am sorry. My hands. They aren't what they used to be. I am so tired." The room went quiet. I saw the look Brad exchanged with Jasmine. It was a look of triumph. They saw the broken glass and the trembling old man, and they saw victory. They thought I was fading. They thought the dementia they were hoping for had finally arrived. "It is okay," Dad Marcus said, though he didn't move to help clean up the glass. "See, this is what we mean. You can't live alone. Accidents happen." I stared at the shards of glass on the floor. "I am just confused," I whispered. "It is all happening so fast. Etta is gone. The house. I don't know. Just sign the papers." "Pops," Brad said, his voice softer now, almost cooing like he was talking to a child. "We will handle the rest. We will take the burden off your shoulders." I looked up at him, making my eyes wide and watery. "I can't sign today," I said. "I need to sleep. I need to pray on it. Leave the papers. Come back tomorrow, please. I just need one night to say goodbye to the house." Brad looked annoyed, checking his watch, but Jasmine nodded. "Let him rest, Brad. One night won't change anything. He knows it is the right thing to do." "Fine," Brad said, straightening his jacket. "Tomorrow, Pops. Noon. We will bring the notary. Pack a bag." They left the papers on the table. They walked out the door without looking back, stepping over the broken glass. I heard them laughing as they walked to their cars. I heard Brad say, "Easier than I thought. The old guy is cooked." I waited until the sound of their engines faded down the street. Then I stood up. My posture straightened. The trembling in my hands vanished. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed the broom, and swept up the glass with steady, precise movements. Cooked. Is that what he thought? I went to the basement. I unlocked the heavy steel cabinet in the corner. Inside was the equipment I had purchased months ago, sensing this day would come. High-definition micro cameras, audio recording devices the size of a button, motion sensors. I spent the next 6 hours turning my home into a surveillance fortress. I felt energized, my mind sharp as a razor. I hid a camera in the smoke detector above the dining table where they would make me sign. I placed microphones behind the family portraits in the living room. I put a sensor in the hallway. Every corner of the house was now eyes and ears. They wanted to watch me. They wanted to manage me. Well, I was going to record every single lie that fell out of their mouths. I was going to build a dossier of evidence so heavy it would crush them. By midnight, the installation was complete. I sat in my armchair looking at the live feed on my secure tablet. The house was silent, but it was no longer defenseless. It was a trap. And tomorrow at noon, the rats would walk right into it. I turned off the lights, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark thinking about the brick I laid 40 years ago and the demolition I was planning for tomorrow. Not of the house, but of them. The next day at noon, the sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows across the porch. But inside my house, the air felt heavy and gray. I sat at the dining room table, the same table where we had celebrated Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings, waiting for the man who wanted to take it all away. I had checked the equipment 3 times. The tiny camera hidden in the smoke detector above my head was blinking a microscopic red light that only I could see. The microphone taped beneath the mahogany table was active. The trap was set. All I needed was the rat. Promptly at 12, Brad walked in. He didn't knock, of course. He strode in with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm and a coffee cup in his hand, looking like he was stopping by a demolition site on his way to a country club. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first work truck, but it couldn't hide the nervous sweat glistening on his upper lip. "Hey there, Pops," Brad said, his voice too loud, too cheerful. He dropped his keys on the side table, scratching the finish. "Hope you slept well. I brought the notary, but she is waiting in the car. I figured we should go over the paperwork first, just man to man. Make sure you understand everything before we bring in the official stamp." He wanted to do this alone. He didn't want witnesses to his lies. I sat still, my hands resting on the table. I made sure they trembled just a little. I kept my shoulders hunched, my eyes slightly unfocused. "Hello, Brad," I said, my voice thin and raspy. "Where are the kids? Where is Marcus?" Brad waved a dismissive hand. "They are busy, Pops. Marcus is handling arrangements. Jasmine is looking at the brochure for sunny days. Everyone is pitching in. But I told them I would handle the boring stuff. The paperwork." He sat down across from me and unzipped the leather portfolio. He pulled out a thick stack of documents. The paper was heavy, expensive. He slid them across the mahogany until they rested right in front of me. "All right, Thad. Here is the situation," Brad said, leaning forward, invading my personal space. "This looks like a lot, I know. It is just standard bureaucratic nonsense. Since we are moving you to sunny days, we need to get your medical coverage sorted out. These forms basically just say that you authorize us to upgrade your health insurance so you get the best care possible. You know, private rooms, the good pudding, that sort of thing." I looked down at the papers. The text was dense, single-spaced, and legalistic. But even without my reading glasses, I could see the bold headers. It didn't say health insurance authorization. It said quitclaim deed. It said irrevocable power of attorney. It said transfer of assets. He wasn't upgrading my insurance. He was asking me to sign over the deed to my house and giving him full legal control over my life. He was asking me to sign my own death warrant. I reached into my shirt pocket and patted it, feigning confusion. I patted my pants pockets. I looked around the table, my movements slow and clumsy. "My glasses," I muttered, panic rising in my voice. "I can't find my glasses, Brad. I can't see the words. They are just ants. Little black ants on the paper." Brad sighed an impatient, heavy sound. He checked his watch. "Look, Pops, you don't really need to read every line. It is just boilerplate, standard stuff. I read it all myself last night. It is clean. Just sign at the X." I looked at him. I let my eyes water. "I can't sign what I can't read, Brad," I said, my voice trembling. Etta always read the papers. She was the smart one. I am just a builder. I need to know what it says." Brad rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling, exasperated, as if dealing with a stubborn toddler. "Fine," he huffed. "Fine. I will read it to you. But we have to make this quick. The notary charges by the hour." He picked up the document. The microphone under the table was recording every frequency. The camera above was capturing every twitch of his lying face. "Go ahead, Brad," I said softly. "Read it to me." Brad cleared his throat. He looked at the paper, which clearly stated transfer of real property, and he began to speak. "This document," Brad said, his voice smooth and practiced, "creates a supplemental health savings account for Thaddeus Moore. It authorizes the transfer of administrative duties regarding medical decisions to Bradley Miller and Jasmine Miller solely for the purpose of ensuring quality of care." He was improvising. He was looking directly at a paragraph about property tax liability and turning it into a fairy tale about medical savings. He flipped the page. "This section here," he continued, pointing at a clause that surrendered my right to contest the sale of the home, "just says that you agree to follow the dietary guidelines of the facility. No salt, low sugar. That kind of thing. It is just to keep your heart healthy, Pops." My heart was pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. It took every ounce of discipline I had learned in 74 years not to reach across the table and wrap my hands around his throat. He was lying to my face, treating me like an illiterate fool. He thought because I worked with concrete and steel that I couldn't understand a contract. He didn't know I had negotiated multi-million-dollar infrastructure deals with the city council while he was still in diapers. I let him finish. I let him weave his web of lies until he ran out of breath. He flipped to the last page, pointed to the signature line, and handed me a heavy gold-plated pen. "There," Brad said, flashing a winning smile. "Simple, right? Just health insurance. Now sign right here and we can get you packed." I took the pen. My hand shook violently. I brought the tip down to the paper. Brad leaned in, his eyes hungry, practically drooling at the thought of the commission he was going to make selling my home. I stopped. I lifted the pen. "I can't do it," I said. Brad's smile froze. "What do you mean you can't do it?" I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the table. "My glasses," I said, looking at him with wide, innocent eyes. "I just remembered where I left them. I left them at the bank." "The bank?" Brad asked, his voice sharpening. "Why were you at the bank?" "I went yesterday," I said, watching his reaction closely. "I went to check on the old safety deposit box. Etta's jewelry. I wanted to see it one last time. I must have left my spectacles on the manager's desk. Mr. Henderson, he knows me." Brad's eyes widened. He didn't care about the glasses. He cared about the bank. He cared about the safety deposit box. He smelled money. "You have a safety deposit box?" Brad asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh yes," I said. "Big one. Etta kept things in there. Old things. I saw the greed flash across his face like lightning. He was thinking about diamonds. He was thinking about bonds. He was thinking he had underestimated the size of the pot. "Well," Brad said, his voice taking on a new urgent energy, "we should go get them. We can go right now." "No," I said, rubbing my temples. "I am too tired, Brad. All this reading. My head hurts. I need to lie down. The stress. The doctor said I need to rest." Brad looked at the papers, then at me. He was torn. He wanted the signature, but now he wanted the box too. "Okay, Pops," he said, making a calculation. "Okay, you rest. We will go tomorrow morning. First thing, we will go to the bank, get your glasses, check the box, and then you can sign these papers right there in front of the notary." "How does that sound?" "That sounds good," I whispered. "Tomorrow." Brad stood up, gathering the papers and sliding them back into his portfolio. He looked triumphant. He thought he had just doubled his winnings. He patted my shoulder a little too hard. "You get some sleep, Thad. Big day tomorrow. We are going to get everything sorted out." He walked out of the house with a bounce in his step. I watched him go. I watched him get into his car and make a call immediately, probably to Jasmine, telling her that the old man was not only compliant but holding out on a treasure chest. I waited until he was gone. Then I stood up. My posture straightened. The tremor in my hands vanished instantly. I walked to the dining room table and retrieved the recording device. I saved the file. I named it the insurance lie. Then I walked to the hallway closet, opened the secret panel in the floorboards that I had built 30 years ago, and descended the narrow wooden stairs into the basement. This wasn't the main basement where the laundry was. This was my workspace, my archive. I walked over to the heavy steel safe in the corner. It was old, fireproof, and unbreakable. Brad thought this safe was full of money. He thought it was full of the cash I was supposedly hoarding. I spun the dial. Left, right, left. The tumblers clicked into place. I pulled the heavy handle and the door swung open with a groan. It was empty of money. There was no gold. There were no diamonds. Instead, there were 3 thick manila folders lying on the metal shelf. I had received them via courier just an hour before Brad arrived, sent by the private investigator Vance had recommended. I picked up the first folder. It was labeled Brad Miller. I opened it. Inside were photos of Brad meeting with loan sharks in the back of a pool hall. There were bank statements showing he had embezzled client deposits to cover his gambling debts. There were emails proving he was on the verge of losing his real estate license for fraud. I picked up the second folder, Marcus Moore. It was even thicker. My son wasn't just bad with money, he was drowning. He had leveraged his own children's college funds to buy cryptocurrency that had crashed to zero. He had taken out loans in my name that I didn't know about until today. I looked at the papers. This was my leverage. This was my ammunition. Brad thought we were going to the bank tomorrow to sign over my life. He didn't know that we were going to the bank to close the coffin on his career. I placed the folders back in the safe and locked it. I stood in the cool, damp silence of the basement, feeling the weight of the truth. My children weren't just greedy. They were desperate. And desperate people were dangerous. But they had forgotten who they were dealing with. I was the one who poured the concrete. I was the one who laid the steel. I knew where the cracks were. And tomorrow I was going to bring the whole structure down on top of their heads. The vibration of the phone on the mahogany table sounded like a drill boring into the silence of the house. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. I had been waiting for this call for 20 years, though I hadn't realized it until yesterday. I picked up the device. The name Marcus flashed in bright white letters. My son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who was currently drowning in a sea of his own making. I slid my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. I didn't have to. "Dad." "What the hell is going on?" Marcus screamed. The sound was distorted, crackling with panic and background noise that sounded like traffic and wind. My card was declined. "Do you hear me?" Declined. I am standing at the counter and the guy is looking at me like I am a criminal. Fix it. Fix it right now. I sat back in my armchair, the leather creaking softly. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was lukewarm, but it tasted like victory. "I cannot fix it, Marcus," I said. My voice was low, trembling just enough to sell the performance. "What do you mean you can't fix it?" he roared. "I have people waiting on this payment. Dangerous people, Dad. This isn't a game. I need $50,000 to clear the balance, or they are going to come for me. You have to call the bank. Tell them it is a mistake. Authorize the transfer. I closed my eyes for a moment. $50,000. He owed loan sharks $50,000. He had gambled away his dignity, and now he wanted to gamble away my safety to cover his losses. "It is not a mistake, son," I said, letting a wheeze creep into my voice. "I got a letter today. The pension fund. The union. They said there was an accounting error, a mismanagement of funds. It is all gone, Marcus. My monthly check, the savings, they froze everything." There was a silence on the other end of the line that was heavier than lead. It was the silence of a parasite realizing the host was dead. "What do you mean gone?" Marcus whispered, his voice dropping to a terrifying hiss. "I mean I am broke," I said. "I have nothing left, just the house, and Brad is already trying to take that." "You are lying," he snapped. "You always have money. You have a stash. I know you do. You are holding out on me. I am coming over there. Do not move. Do not go anywhere." The line went dead. I placed the phone back on the table. I looked around the living room. It was tidy. Edda's porcelain figures were lined up on the mantel. The rugs were vacuumed. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I opened the junk drawer next to the sink. Underneath a stack of expired coupons and rubber bands, I placed a small blue bank book. I had prepared it weeks ago. It showed a balance of $200.14. Then I went back to my chair and waited. It took him 20 minutes to get across town. I heard his car screech into the driveway, the tires tearing up the grass I had just mowed. The front door flew open with a crash that shook the frame. Marcus stood in the doorway. He looked wild. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt was stained with sweat, and his hands were shaking. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a junkie looking for a fix. "Where is it?" he shouted, stepping into the house. He didn't take off his shoes. He kicked the door shut behind him. I stayed seated. I gripped the arms of the chair, making my knuckles white. "I don't have anything, Marcus," I said. "I told you. The pension is gone." "Liar," he screamed. He stormed into the room. He grabbed the vase of flowers on the side table and threw it against the wall. The ceramic shattered, water and petals exploding across the wallpaper. "You have cash. You always keep cash in the house. Where is the safe? Where is the lockbox?" He began to tear the room apart. He pulled the cushions off the sofa and ripped the fabric, searching for hidden envelopes. He swept the books off the shelves, searching for hollowed-out volumes. He was a hurricane of desperation. I watched him. This was my son. This was the legacy I was leaving behind. A man who would destroy his childhood home for a handful of paper. "Marcus, stop," I pleaded, injecting fear into my voice. "You are destroying your mother's things." "I don't care about her things," he yelled, turning on me. "I care about my life. Do you know what these people will do to me? They will cut off my fingers, Dad. They will break my legs. I need money. Now." He ran into the kitchen. I heard drawers being yanked open and dumped onto the floor. Silverware clattered against the tile. He was looking for the stash. He was looking for the blue book. I heard a pause. The frantic noise stopped. Then he walked back into the living room. He was holding the blue bank book in his hand. He was staring at it, his face pale, his mouth open in disbelief. $200, he whispered. $200. Is this a joke? Is this some kind of sick lesson? "It is all I have," I said softly. "The bank took the rest to cover the overdrafts. To cover your credit card bills, Marcus." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw pure hatred in his eyes. It wasn't disappointment, it wasn't frustration, it was hatred. He hated me because I was no longer useful. He hated me because the well had run dry. "You useless old man," he spat. "You selfish, useless old man. You sat on this money for years, judging me, controlling me, and now when I actually need you, you have nothing. You let it all go." He stepped closer. He towered over me. I was sitting down, making myself look small, but inside, the lion was roaring. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to show him the strength that had built skyscrapers and highways. I wanted to backhand him across the face and tell him to get a job. But I didn't. I needed this. I needed the evidence. I needed the camera in the smoke detector to see exactly who he was. "I am sorry, son," I said. "Sorry doesn't pay the sharks," he shouted. He lunged forward. He grabbed the lapels of my cardigan. He yanked me up from the chair. My feet dangled for a second. His breath smelled of sour whiskey and fear. "You better find more," he growled, shaking me. "You better dig up the backyard. You better sell your kidney. I don't care. You find me that money, or I swear to God I will burn this house down with you inside it." "Marcus, please," I choked out. He shoved me. He didn't just let go. He pushed me with all his strength. I flew backward. My legs hit the edge of the coffee table, and I went down hard. I landed on the floor, my shoulder slamming against the wood. Pain shot through my arm, sharp and hot. I lay there groaning, clutching my shoulder. Marcus stood over me, his chest heaving. He looked at his hands, then at me. For a second I thought he might help me. I thought he might realize what he had done. But he didn't. He just sneered. "Look at you," he said. "Pathetic. Mom would be ashamed of you." Suddenly the front door opened. We both froze. Standing in the doorway with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a look of absolute horror on his face was Jordan, my grandson, Marcus's son. He was 19 years old, tall and lanky, with eyes that saw too much. He looked from me lying on the floor in pain to his father standing over me with fists clenched and a face twisted in rage. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Dad Jordan said, his voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" Marcus spun around. He looked panicked now. The bravado was gone, replaced by the cowardice of a man caught in the act. "Jordan," he stammered, "it is not what it looks like. Grandpa fell. He is sick. He is confused. I was trying to help him up." Jordan didn't move. He looked at the shattered vase against the wall. He looked at the ripped sofa cushions. He looked at the blue bank book crumpled in Marcus's hand. Then he looked at me. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just looked back at my grandson, letting the pain and the truth sit plainly on my face. Jordan walked past his father. He didn't even look at him. He walked straight to me, knelt down, and gently put his hand on my uninjured shoulder. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded slowly. "I think so, son. Just help me up." Jordan put his arm around me and hoisted me to my feet. He was stronger than he looked. He glared at his father. "Get out," Jordan said. What Marcus asked, blinking. "I said get out," Jordan repeated, his voice rising. "Get out before I call the police." Marcus looked at his son, then at me. He realized he had lost the audience. He realized he had lost control. He stuffed the bank book into his pocket, pointed a shaking finger at me, and backed toward the door. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You fix this, old man, or you are dead." He turned and ran out the door. We heard his car start up and peel away, tires screeching down the street. Jordan helped me to the armchair. He didn't ask questions. He went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and brought it to me. His hands were shaking. I took the water. I looked at the boy. He had Edda's eyes. He had my chin. And unlike his father, he had a spine. "I am sorry you had to see that, Jordan," I said softly. Jordan shook his head, looking at the front door where his father had just fled. "I am not," he said. "Now I know." I took a sip of water. The pain in my shoulder was throbbing, but my mind was clear. The trap had sprung. Marcus had shown his true face, and he had done it in front of the one person who might have saved him. The family was broken. But looking at Jordan, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was one piece worth saving. "You should go home, son," I said. "Your mother will be worried." Jordan sat down on the coffee table right where the brochure for the nursing home had been yesterday. "No," he said firmly. "Mom sent me here to spy on you. She told me to find out where you keep your money. But I am not going anywhere. I am staying right here." I looked at him surprised. The boy was a double agent, or he was supposed to be. I put the glass down. I leaned forward. "Okay," I said. "If you are staying, you need to know the truth, but you have to promise me something." "What?" he asked. "You can't tell them I said. You can't tell them anything. Not about the money, not about the car in the garage, not about any of it." Jordan frowned. "What money?" I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in days. "Help me down to the basement, Jordan. I have something to show you." My shoulder throbbed where my own son had shoved me a dull, rhythmic reminder of how far the fruit had fallen from the tree. But as Jordan's strong young hands gripped my arm, hoisting me up from the hardwood floor, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a fragile thing, like a sprout pushing through concrete, but it was there. I groaned as I settled into the kitchen chair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the ache of old bones and a broken heart. Jordan stood over me, hovering, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. He looked so much like my wife in that moment. He had Edda's softness, her capacity for empathy, that my own children had seemingly scrubbed from their DNA. "Sit down, son," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite me. "You are making me nervous, standing there like a guard dog." Jordan sat. He didn't look at me. He picked at a loose thread on his jeans, his leg bouncing up and down with nervous energy. The house was quiet again, but the air was thick with the ugly truth that had just exploded in our living room. I am sorry, Jordan whispered. You have nothing to be sorry for, I said. You didn't push me. You didn't demand money I don't have. No, he said, his voice cracking. I mean, I am sorry for why I am here. I looked at him. I took a sip of the water he had poured for me. Why are you here, Jordan? He took a deep breath, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet. Dad and Mom, they sent me. They told me I had to come stay with you. They said you were losing your mind. They said you were hiding cash in coffee cans and under floorboards, and that if I didn't find it, someone else would steal it. I nodded slowly. It was exactly what I expected, but hearing it out loud, hearing how they had weaponized their own child against me, made my blood run cold. And what were you supposed to do if you found this money? I asked. Jordan looked down at his hands. I was supposed to take it. They said it was for the family. They said you wouldn't even miss it because you wouldn't remember you had it. They told me if I did this, if I found the stash, they would finally have enough money to pay for my college applications. They said I could stop working at the warehouse. He buried his face in his hands. I felt like such a scumbag grandpa. I walked in here thinking I was doing something good for the family, saving our future or whatever, but then I saw Dad. I saw him put his hands on you. And I realized, there is no future. There is just him needing a fix for his debts. I reached across the table and pulled his hands away from his face. Look at me, son. He looked at me. They lied to you, I said firmly. They lied to you about me. They lied to you about the money. And they lied to you about what it means to be a man. A man does not steal from the vulnerable. A man does not hurt his father. Jordan wiped his nose with the back of his hand. I know. I see that now. I am done with them, Grandpa. I am not going back there. I studied him. I had to be sure. This was the turning point. If I brought him into the fold, if I revealed the cards I was holding, there was no going back. I was 74 years old. I couldn't fight this war alone anymore. I needed a soldier. Stand up, I said. Jordan stood up looking confused. Come with me. I led him out the back door. The night air was crisp, smelling of rain and pine. We walked across the cracked pavement of the driveway to the detached garage. It was a separate structure from the house built with reinforced concrete blocks. To the neighbors, it was just a dusty old workshop where Thaddeus Moore tinkered with junk. I pulled the heavy key ring from my pocket and unlocked the side door. I flicked the switch. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered to life, bathing the space in a cool white glow. The garage was spotless. Tools were hung on pegboards with surgical precision. The floor was painted a glossy gray. And in the center of the room, covered by a heavy, custom-fitted canvas tarp, sat a shape that was unmistakably aggressive. Jordan looked around. I thought you just had the old sedan, he said. I walked over to the tarp. I grabbed the corner and pulled. The canvas slid off with a heavy swoosh, revealing the beast beneath. It was a 1969 Pontiac GTO. The Judge. Carousel red paint that looked deep enough to drown in. The chrome bumper shone like a mirror. The hood scoop sat there like a promise of violence. It was a muscle car from a different era, a machine built for power and speed restored to better-than-factory condition. Jordan's jaw dropped. He walked toward it as if he were approaching a religious shrine. He reached out a hand but stopped inches from the fender, afraid to touch it. Grandpa, he breathed. Is this real? It is real, I said, running my hand along the roofline. I bought the chassis from a junkyard 20 years ago for $500. I spent the next 10 years rebuilding every nut and bolt. The engine is a Ram Air 4 V8. It puts out 370 horsepower. Jordan looked at me, his eyes wide. This car, in this condition, it is worth 6 figures. I finished for him, maybe more at the right auction. I walked over to the workbench and picked up a rag, wiping a speck of imaginary dust from the hood. Jordan turned to me. Why? Why do you drive that rust bucket sedan if you have this? Why do you live like you are broke? I leaned against the car, crossing my arms. Because Jordan, wealth is like blood. You need it to live, but if you show it to everyone, you are just bleeding. And when you bleed, the sharks come. I looked him dead in the eye. I am not poor, Jordan. I am not senile. And I am certainly not broke. I sold my company 15 years ago for $12 million. Jordan stumbled back a step, hitting a stack of tires. 12 million. I nodded. It is all in trusts, investments, real estate. I hid it because I wanted your father and your aunt to make their own way. I wanted them to build their own character. But I failed. I starved them of money, hoping they would learn to hunt, but instead they just learned to scavenge. I pushed off the car and walked toward him. I put my hands on his shoulders. I am telling you this because I need you. I need someone on the inside, someone they trust, someone they think is just a dumb kid doing their dirty work. Jordan looked at the car, then at me. You want me to be a spy? I want you to be my eyes and ears, I said. I want you to go back to them. I want you to tell them you are looking. Tell them the old man is crazy. Tell them you are searching the house every night. But you report to me. Jordan swallowed hard. He looked at the GTO, the symbol of a secret life of a power he never knew I had. If you do this, I said, my voice low. If you stick with me, I will pay for your college. Any school you want. Cash. And when I am gone, this car and everything else, it doesn't go to Marcus. It doesn't go to LaToya. It goes to the one person who stood by me when I was down. Jordan's eyes locked onto mine. He didn't look at the car this time. He looked at me. He saw the grandfather who had taught him to fish the man who had just been assaulted by his own son. I don't want the money, Grandpa Jordan said. I mean, college would be great. But I am doing this because Dad is wrong. What they are doing is evil. Good man, I said, squeezing his shoulder. Good man. Now tell me, what else do you know? What are they planning? Jordan took a breath. He looked nervous again. It is Uncle Brad, he said. I heard him talking to Mom on the phone yesterday. He has a friend. A doctor. Dr. Finch. I narrowed my eyes. I knew Finch. He was a pill pusher who had lost his license in 2 other states before setting up shop in a strip mall here. What about Finch? I asked. Jordan lowered his voice, even though we were alone in a soundproof garage. Brad is paying him, Jordan said. He is paying him $5,000 cash. They're going to bring him to the house tomorrow. He is going to do an exam. An exam, I repeated. Yeah, he is going to certify that you have dementia. Advanced stage. Brad is already filling out the paperwork for the court. He is forging your medical history, Grandpa. He is making up incidents. He wrote down that you burned the kitchen down last week. He wrote down that you wander into traffic. I felt the heat rise in my chest again, but this time it was controlled. It was fuel. They are going to fabricate a medical file to strip me of my rights, I said. Yes, Jordan said. And once they have that paper from Dr. Finch, Brad says he can get an emergency guardianship order within 24 hours. He says by Friday you will be in Sunny Days and the house will be listed on Zillow. I looked at the Pontiac. I looked at the reflection of my own face in the polished paint. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a general surveying the battlefield. They want to play doctor, I said softly. Okay, we will play doctor. I turned to Jordan. Go home, son. Tell your dad you tore the living room apart and didn't find anything yet, but you think there is a safe in the basement floor. Tell him you need more time. Keep him hungry. Jordan nodded. What are you going to do about Finch? I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. I am going to take my medicine, Jordan, and then I am going to give Dr. Finch a checkup he will never forget. Jordan turned to leave but stopped at the door. Grandpa, he said, that car, it is beautiful. I nodded. It is, and it is fast, just like we are going to have to be. Now go. The war starts tomorrow. I stood at the kitchen counter and stared at the small orange bottle in my hand. My heart was already beating a little faster than usual, anticipation thrumming through my veins like a live wire. I shook 2 pills into my palm. They were beta blockers, leftovers from a prescription I hadn't needed in years. Taken in a high dose by a healthy man, they wouldn't kill me, but they would drop my blood pressure and make my hands shake like leaves in a hurricane. I tossed them into my mouth and swallowed them dry. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door open. Brad walked in, and trailing behind him was a man who looked more like a used car salesman than a physician. This had to be Dr. Finch. He was wearing a white coat that looked a size too small and carried a battered leather satchel. He smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne, the scent of a man who had stopped caring about his reputation a long time ago. There he is, Dr. Brad said, pointing at me as if I were a zoo animal. He is having one of his episodes. Just look at him. I was sitting in my armchair now. The pills were kicking in. My hands resting on my knees were trembling violently. I let my jaw go slack. I stared at a spot on the wall just past Finch's left ear. Doctor. Finch walked over his eyes, scanning the room, probably looking for anything valuable he could swipe. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for my name. He just pulled a pen light from his pocket and flashed it in my eyes. "Mr. Moore," he said, his voice bored. "Do you know where you are?" I blinked, letting my eyelids flutter. "I am in the station," I mumbled, slurring my words intentionally. "Waiting for the train. The cargo needs to go to Memphis." Brad let out a snort of laughter. "See, I told you. He thinks he is back at work. He has been like this for days." Finch nodded, tucking the pen light away. He grabbed my wrist to check my pulse. He must have felt the irregularity caused by the pills, the clammy coldness of my skin. "Classic signs," Finch muttered. "Disorientation, physical tremors, cognitive regression. It looks like rapid-onset dementia, possibly exacerbated by a series of mini-strokes." He hadn't even taken my blood pressure. He hadn't asked about my medical history. He was diagnosing me based on 30 seconds of theater. I decided to test him. I decided to see just how dirty he really was. I looked up at him, sharpening my gaze for just a second. "Doctor," I said, my voice suddenly clear, though I kept my hand shaking. "According to the DSM-5 criteria for major neurocognitive disorder, wouldn't you need to conduct a mini-mental state examination and rule out delirium caused by medication interactions before making a diagnosis?" Finch froze. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. For a second, the con artist saw the predator looking back at him. He hadn't expected a medical citation from the senile old man. Brad stepped in, nervous. "What is he talking about?" "He is parroting," Finch said quickly, recovering his composure. "It is a symptom. Echolalia. He is just repeating words he heard on television or the radio. It actually confirms the diagnosis. The brain is misfiring, accessing random vocabulary without context." It was a lie so bold, so medically inaccurate that it was almost impressive. He was twisting my sanity into proof of my insanity. I let my head drop back against the chair. I let the tremors take over my whole body. I knocked my cane over on purpose, the wood clattering loudly against the floor. "The train is late," I wailed, making my voice crack. "The schedule is all wrong." Finch stepped back, wiping his hands on his coat as if my condition were contagious. "I have seen enough," Mr. Miller Finch said to Brad. "The decline is severe. He is a danger to himself. He cannot be left alone. I am prepared to sign the affidavit of incapacity." Brad grinned. It was the smile of a man who had just won the lottery. "That is a relief," Dr. Brad said. "We just want him to be safe." Finch pulled a clipboard from his satchel. He placed a document on the coffee table right next to the hidden microphone I had installed under the coaster. I watched through slitted eyes as he uncapped a fountain pen. "I, Dr. Lawrence Finch, hereby certify that Thaddeus Moore lacks the capacity to manage his financial and personal affairs due to advanced cognitive impairment," he read aloud as he wrote. The scratch of the pen on the paper sounded like a shovel digging a grave. But it wasn't my grave. Brad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. It was bulky. Cash. He slid it across the table to Finch. "Thank you for your time," Dr. Brad said. "For the house call." Finch picked up the envelope. He didn't even try to hide it. He weighed it in his hand, a quick practiced motion, and slipped it into his satchel. "Just doing my duty," Finch said. They stood up to leave. Brad looked at me one last time, shaking his head with mock pity. "Get some rest, Pops," he said. "We will get you to a nice place soon." They walked to the door. I waited until their backs were turned. I stopped shaking. I sat up straight. I looked at the back of Dr. Finch's cheap suit. "Thank you, doctor," I whispered to the empty room as the door clicked shut. "You didn't just sign a diagnosis. You just signed your prison sentence." I waited for the sound of Brad's car to fade away. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and drank a tall glass of water to flush the beta blockers out of my system. My hands were steady again. My mind was sharp. I walked over to the wall calendar and circled the date. Today was the day they thought they won. Today was the day they handed me the weapon that would destroy them. I picked up my phone and dialed Vance. "He signed it," I said. "Good," Vance replied. "Did the camera catch the envelope?" "Every bill," I said. "Then we have him," Vance said. "What is the next move?" I looked out the window at the oak tree in the backyard. Now I said we go digging for gold. The sun was setting, casting long skeletal shadows across the backyard, and I knew it was time to bait the hook. I sat in my armchair by the bay window, the one that looked directly out at the massive 100-year-old oak tree that anchored the property. It was a majestic thing with roots that snaked through the earth like the veins of a giant. Brad and Marcus were in the kitchen. I could hear the aggressive clinking of bottles and the low murmur of their voices. They were likely arguing about money. They were always arguing about money these days. Marcus was probably begging Brad for a loan to cover the vigorish on his gambling debts, and Brad was probably explaining that he had tapped out his own accounts trying to keep up the appearance of a successful real estate mogul. I started to rock back and forth in the chair. I let my eyes lose focus, staring intently at the base of the tree. I started to mutter low at first, then loud enough to carry into the kitchen. "It is safe, Etta. It is safe. They will never look there. Too deep, too heavy." The voices in the kitchen stopped instantly. I heard the scrape of a chair. Footsteps approached the living room doorway. I kept rocking. I rubbed my hands together as if I were washing off dirt. "Gold," I whispered, putting a tremor in my voice. "Solid gold bars. The retirement fund, buried deep, right under the big root facing south." I saw Marcus's reflection in the window glass. He was standing in the doorway, his body rigid. Brad was right behind him, his eyes wide and hungry. They were frozen like wolves catching the scent of blood on the wind. I let out a long, shaky sigh. Nobody knows Etta. Just us. The map is in my head, 6 feet down, under the south root, the metal box, millions. Then I let my head loll to the side and closed my eyes, feigning the sudden exhausted sleep of the senile. I heard them retreat to the kitchen. Their whispers were frantic now, urgent. "Did you hear that?" Brad hissed. "Gold bars," he said, "millions." "He is crazy," Marcus whispered back, but there was a greedy edge to his voice. "He is talking nonsense." "Is he?" Brad countered. "Think about it. He sold that company for cash. We never found the money in the bank accounts. What if he didn't trust the banks? What if the old man buried it? It makes sense. That is exactly what a paranoid old guy would do." I heard the back door open and close softly. They were going out to scout the location. I waited until I heard their cars leave an hour later. They had gone to get supplies. They wouldn't dig during the day. They were too cowardly for that. They would wait for the cover of darkness. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and smiled. I went upstairs to my bedroom, which had the perfect vantage point overlooking the backyard. I set up my night vision camera on a tripod hidden behind the sheer curtains. Then I went to the wine cellar, a small cabinet they hadn't bothered to raid yet, and pulled out a bottle of 1996 Bordeaux. I uncorked it and let it breathe. Tonight was going to be dinner and a show. At 2 a.m, the show began. I was sitting in a high-backed chair by the window, the lights off, swirling the dark red wine in my glass. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the backyard a pit of ink-black darkness. Then a beam of light cut through the gloom. Then another. They came creeping around the side of the house like 2 oversized raccoons. Brad was wearing a dark tracksuit that still looked too expensive for manual labor. Marcus was wearing jeans and a hoodie. They were carrying shovels and pickaxes they must have bought at a 24-hour hardware store. They approached the oak tree with a reverence they had never shown me. Brad pointed his flashlight at the massive root system spreading out to the south. Here I heard Brad whisper, his voice amplified by the directional microphone I had mounted on the windowsill. He said the south root, 6 feet down. They started to dig. It wasn't easy digging. The ground around an oak tree is hard-packed tight with decades of growth and smaller roots that act like a net. I watched as Brad slammed the shovel into the earth only to have it bounce off a rock. He cursed loudly. "Keep it down, you idiot," Marcus hissed. "You want to wake him up." "He is out cold," Brad grunted. "He took those pills. He won't wake up for a bomb blast. Just dig." I took a sip of wine. It was smooth with notes of cherry and oak. I zoomed the camera in. For the next 3 hours, I watched my son and son-in-law destroy my backyard. They were sweating profusely, their clothes stained with mud and grass. They hacked at roots with the pickaxes. They shoveled piles of heavy wet earth onto my manicured lawn. They were driven by a feverish desperation, the kind that shuts off the logical part of the brain. Every time their shovels hit a rock, they would freeze eyes wide, thinking they had hit the metal box. "Is that it?" Marcus would gasp. "No, just another damn rock," Brad would spit back, throwing the stone over his shoulder. They dug a trench, then they dug a pit. They were waist deep in the earth, 2 men who thought they were too good to work now, doing the hardest labor of their lives for a phantom treasure. By 4 a.m, they were exhausted. Brad was leaning against the tree trunk, gasping for air, his face streaked with dirt. Marcus was sitting in the bottom of the hole looking like a defeated child. "There is nothing here," Marcus groaned. "He is crazy. He made it up." "Dig deeper," Brad snapped, though he didn't move to help. He said 6 feet. "We are only at 4. It has to be here." $12 million, Marcus. Think about the debt. Think about the cars. Dig. They kept going until the sky started to turn a bruised purple in the east. The birds began to sing. They had turned my backyard into a crater field, but they hadn't found a single coin. I saved the video file. I named it The Treasure Hunt. I finished my wine and went downstairs to put on a pot of coffee. At 7 o'clock, I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch holding a steaming mug. The morning air was cool. Brad and Marcus were still there. They were sitting on the edge of the massive hole they had dug, looking utterly broken. Their hands were blistered. Their expensive clothes were ruined. They looked up at me with a mixture of fear and hatred. "Good morning, boys," I said, my voice bright and cheery. They didn't say anything. They just stared. I was about to ask what they were doing when a police cruiser rolled slowly down the alleyway that ran behind my property. It stopped right at my back fence. The window rolled down. It was Sergeant Miller, a man I had known for 30 years. We fished together sometimes. Miller looked over the fence. He looked at the mountain of dirt. He looked at the deep hole. He looked at Brad and Marcus, who looked like they had just committed a crime and were trying to bury the evidence. "Morning," Thad Miller called out. "Everything all right back here? Looks like a bomb went off." I walked to the fence, leaning casually against the post. "Morning, Sarge." "Oh, everything is fine. The boys here, they decided to surprise me. They are putting in a koi pond. Isn't that right, boys?" I looked back at them. Brad's face was pale beneath the dirt. Marcus looked like he was about to vomit. If they denied it, they would have to explain why they were digging 6-foot holes in the middle of the night. "Yeah," Brad croaked, his voice cracking. "A koi pond. For relaxation." Miller raised an eyebrow. He was a cop. He knew what a koi pond looked like, and he knew what 2 desperate men looking for buried money looked like. But he also knew me. He saw the twinkle in my eye. "That is mighty nice of them," Miller said, his gaze lingering on the blisters on Brad's hands. "That is hard work. You boys make sure you fill that in if you change your minds. Wouldn't want anyone falling in." He tipped his cap to me. "You take care, Thad. You too, Sarge." The cruiser rolled away. I turned back to my son and son-in-law. "Well," I said, taking a sip of coffee, "I didn't know you two cared so much about my garden. But you missed the spot." I pointed to a spot 10 feet to the left. "Etta always said the light was better over there." I turned and walked back into the house, leaving them in the mud with nothing but blisters and a hole in the ground to show for their greed. They didn't find the gold, but they had just given me something much more valuable. They had given me the footage that proved they were not just negligent, they were actively predatory. And insane enough to dig for imaginary treasure. The trap was tightening, and the lion was getting ready to feed. Saturday morning brought a new kind of violation. I sat on the front porch in my rocking chair, a blanket draped over my legs to hide the tension in my muscles, watching my daughter turn my front lawn into a flea market. Jasmine had arrived at dawn with a team of movers she had hired off an app. They hadn't come to clean. They had come to clear out. Everything Etta owned was out there. Her Sunday dresses, the ones she wore to church with such pride, were hanging on a rusty metal rack Jasmine had dragged out of the garage. Her collection of ceramic teapots, each one hand-painted, was spread out on a folding table. The quilt she had spent 3 winters stitching was thrown over the porch railing like a dirty rag. "Everything must go," Jasmine shouted to a passerby, her voice shrill and devoid of any sentiment. Cash only, no reasonable offer refused. She looked like a carnival barker. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a fanny pack stuffing crumpled bills into it every time she sold a piece of her mother's soul for pennies. A lamp Etta loved went for $5. A box of her favorite books went for $2. I watched it all. I didn't say a word. I didn't try to stop her. If I had intervened, she would have just fought me, and I needed her to incriminate herself. I needed the camera hidden in the porch light to capture the exact moment she sold her mother's memory for pocket change. But I wasn't going to let Etta's things disappear. A gray van pulled up to the curb. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a nondescript beige coat and a hat pulled low. Jasmine didn't know her, but I did. She was the wife of one of my former foremen, a woman I trust with my life. I had called her last night and given her $5,000 cash and strict instructions. I watched as the woman walked up the driveway. She began to point at things, the rack of dresses, the box of shoes, the kitchenware. How much for the lot, the woman asked. Jasmine looked up, her eyes lighting up behind her sunglasses. She did a quick calculation looking at the pile of what she considered junk. $500, Jasmine said. And you haul it away right now. Done, the woman said. She handed Jasmine 5 crisp $100 bills. Jasmine snatched them, checking the watermark, a greedy smile spreading across her face. She didn't care who bought the clothes. She didn't care that my wife's scent was still on them. She just cared about the paper in her hand. Pull the van up, Jasmine ordered, waving her hand dismissively. Get this trash out of here. Trash. I gripped the armrests of my rocker. I watched as the woman loaded Edda's life into the van. I knew that in an hour, all of it would be sitting in a storage unit under my name safe and sound. But seeing Jasmine sell it, seeing her treat it like garbage, burned a hole in my stomach. Once the lawn was clear, Jasmine counted her money. She looked disappointed. $500 wasn't enough. It wouldn't even cover the bottle service she wanted for next weekend. She turned and looked at the house. She looked at me. You are useless out here, Dad, she said, walking past me. I am going inside. There has to be something of real value in this dump. She slammed the screen door. I heard her footsteps heavy and impatient on the hardwood floor. She was heading for the master bedroom. I stood up and followed her. I moved slowly, leaning on my cane, keeping up the charade. But my mind was racing. I knew exactly what she was looking for. When I entered the bedroom, it looked like a storm had hit. Drawers were pulled out and dumped on the floor. The mattress was askew. Jasmine was standing at Edda's vanity, her hands sweeping across the surface, knocking over perfume bottles and picture frames. Where is it? She hissed. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her reflection in the mirror, her face twisted in frustration. Where is what, Jasmine? I asked, standing in the doorway. The jewelry box, she snapped, spinning around. The velvet one. The one with the good stuff, her diamond earrings, the pearl necklace, and the ring. The engagement ring. That rock was 2 carats, Dad. I know it was. Where did you hide it? I looked at the empty spot on the vanity. I had moved the jewelry weeks ago, placing it in the same safety deposit box, where the deed to the house used to be. But I had left one thing. I walked over to the nightstand. I opened the top drawer. Inside was a small blue velvet box. It was the box for Edda's wedding ring. Jasmine saw it. She lunged past me, shoving me aside. She grabbed the box, her fingers clawing at the lid. She popped it open. It was empty. A scream tore from her throat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. She threw the box across the room. It hit the wall and bounced onto the floor. Where is it? She screamed, advancing on me. She looked deranged. Her hair was messy, her lipstick smeared. You sold it, didn't you? You senile old bat. You sold Mom's ring. I didn't back away. I stood my ground. I looked at my daughter, the stranger who shared my blood but none of my heart. I didn't sell it, I said. My voice was calm, eerily calm. Then where is it? She demanded, getting right in my face. I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the sweat of her exertion. That ring is my inheritance. It belongs to me. Give it to me. I looked her in the eye. I decided to tell her a lie. A lie so grotesque, so heavy that it would stop her in her tracks. A lie that would haunt her. Your mother, I said, lowering my voice to a whisper. She knew you were coming. She knew you would come for the gold before the grass grew over her grave. Jasmine blinked, confused. What are you talking about? In the hospital, I said, letting my voice tremble. The last night. She woke up. She was in so much pain, Jasmine, but she was lucid. She asked for her ring. She asked me to take it off her finger and put it in her hand. Jasmine was listening now. Her greed was replaced by a flicker of unease. And then I continued staring past her as if I were seeing a ghost. She put it in her mouth. She swallowed it, Jasmine. She swallowed the ring. Jasmine's face went slack. Her skin turned a sickly shade of green. She what? She whispered. She swallowed it, I repeated. She said she wanted to take it with her. She said it was the only way to keep it safe from the vultures. I looked down at Jasmine's stomach, then back up to her eyes. It is inside her, Jasmine. 6 feet down. If you want that ring, you are going to have to go to the cemetery. You are going to have to dig her up, and you are going to have to cut it out of her. Jasmine stumbled back. She put a hand over her mouth, gagging slightly. The image was visceral. It was horrifying. And because she knew the depths of her own greed, she believed that her mother would be desperate enough to do it. You are sick, she choked out. You are both sick. She grabbed her fanny pack from the dresser. She didn't look for anything else. The thought of the ring encased in her dead mother's body had broken her resolve. It was a line even she couldn't cross, or at least not today. She ran out of the room. I heard her running down the hallway, out the front door and down the steps. I heard her car door slam and the engine roar as she sped away. I stood in the middle of the wrecked bedroom. I looked at the empty velvet box on the floor. The ring wasn't in Etta's stomach. It was in my pocket. I reached in and pulled it out. The diamond caught the light from the window. It was clean. It was pure. "Forgive me, Etta," I whispered to the empty room. "Forgive me for the lie, but I had to make sure she never touched it again." I kissed the ring and put it back in my pocket. Then I walked over to the window. I saw the dust settling in the driveway where Jasmine had fled. She was gone, but Brad was still out there, and tomorrow he was going to try to drag me into a courtroom. I looked at the mess on the floor. Let them come. The lion was awake, and he was hungry. The subpoena did not come in the mail. It arrived with a heavy knock on my door at 7 a.m. A sheriff's deputy stood on my porch looking uncomfortable as he handed me a thick envelope. He knew me. He knew I had built the community center where his kids played basketball. But the law is the law. I took the papers with a shaking hand, not because I was afraid, but because the show had to go on. Emergency guardianship hearing. The words were printed in bold at the top of the page. The petitioner was Bradley Miller. The respondent was Thaddeus Moore. The allegation was severe cognitive decline and immediate danger to self and assets. I walked into the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee. I didn't call Vance immediately. I sat there and read every word of the lies Brad had concocted. He claimed I was hallucinating. He claimed I was burning money. He claimed I didn't know my own name half the time. It was a masterpiece of fiction. I finished my coffee and went to the closet. I pushed aside the Italian suits I had bought during my years as a CEO, the silk ties, and the polished Oxfords. I reached for the back of the rack. I pulled out a gray suit I hadn't worn since the 90s. It was a little too big now, the fabric worn shiny at the elbows, smelling faintly of mothballs and age. I put it on. I didn't comb my hair too neatly. I let my gray stubble show. I grabbed my cane, the one I didn't actually need, and practiced my walk in the hallway. A shuffle, a hesitation, the walk of a man who had lost his way. When I arrived at the courthouse, Vance was waiting for me on the steps. He was dressed in his sharpest navy suit, a shark in a sea of minnows. He looked at me, his eyes twinkling with suppressed amusement. "You look terrible," Eli Vance said, shaking my hand. "That is the point," I rasped, letting my voice crack. We walked into the courtroom. It was a small room smelling of floor wax and old paper. Brad and Jasmine were already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table. They looked like they were attending a funeral, dressed in somber colors, their faces masks of concern. But I saw the way Brad tapped his pen against the table. He was excited. He was practically vibrating with greed. They had hired a lawyer I recognized. A man named Sterling who charged $500 an hour to destroy families. He was slick, loud, and aggressive. I sat down next to Vance. I slumped in my chair, staring at the table, my mouth slightly open. I didn't look at the judge. I didn't look at my children. I just stared at the wood grain as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. "All rise," the bailiff shouted. Judge Walters entered. He was a stern man with a reputation for moving cases quickly. He looked at the docket, then at me. He saw a frail, confused old man in a cheap suit. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed," the judge said. Sterling stood up and buttoned his jacket. He walked to the center of the room, exuding confidence. "Your Honor, we are here today because of a tragedy." Sterling began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Thaddeus Moore is a man who worked hard his whole life. But age comes for us all. In the wake of his wife's death, Mr. Moore's mental state has collapsed. He is no longer the man he was. He is confused. He is paranoid. And he is a danger to himself." I let out a small confused noise, cupping my ear as if I couldn't hear him. Vance put a hand on my arm to calm me. "Do you have evidence of this decline?" the judge asked. "We do, Your Honor," Sterling said. He walked to the evidence table. "We have a sworn affidavit from Dr. Lawrence Finch, a respected physician who examined Mr. Moore in his home just days ago. Dr. Finch certifies that Mr. Moore is suffering from advanced dementia, likely exacerbated by grief. He notes severe disorientation and memory loss." I watched Brad. He was nodding solemnly, looking at the floor as if this pained him deeply. "He was a good actor," Sterling continued. "But we don't just have a doctor's note, Your Honor. We have video evidence. Evidence of Mr. Moore's erratic behavior in his own home. Brad pulled a laptop out of his bag and connected it to the courtroom screen. I watched as a video played. It was me. It was the moment from 3 days ago when I dropped the glass of water. But the video had been edited. It had been chopped and slowed down. It showed me staring blankly at the wall. It showed my hand shaking violently. It showed the glass shattering. Then it cut to a clip of me muttering to myself in the rocking chair, the audio enhanced to make my whispers about the train to Memphis sound like the ravings of a lunatic. "See, Your Honor," Sterling said, pointing at the screen. "He is talking to people who aren't there. He is breaking things. His family is terrified that next time it won't be a glass of water. It will be the gas stove, or he will wander into traffic." The judge watched the video, his brow furrowed. He looked from the screen to me. I shrank into my chair, pulling my jacket tighter around myself. "Mr. Moore," the judge said, addressing me directly. I didn't answer. I kept staring at the table. "Mr. Moore," the judge said louder. "Can you hear me?" I looked up slowly, blinking rapidly. I looked at Vance, then at the judge. Is the train here yet?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I need to get the cargo to Memphis." A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. I saw Jasmine cover her mouth with her hand, feigning a sob. Brad put his arm around her, comforting her, playing the hero. Vance stood up. "Your Honor, my client is having a difficult day. The stress of these proceedings is overwhelming for him." The judge nodded, a look of pity crossing his face. "I can see that." Sterling jumped back in. "Your Honor, this proves our point. He doesn't even know where he is. He thinks he is working a job he retired from 20 years ago. We are asking for emergency temporary guardianship to be granted to Bradley Miller immediately. We need to secure his assets and get him into a facility where he can be cared for before he hurts himself." The judge looked at the papers. He looked at the affidavit from Dr. Finch. He looked at the edited video. It was a slam dunk. In his eyes, I was a husk of a man. I leaned over to Vance and whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Who are these people, Vance? Why are they in my kitchen?" The judge sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is a difficult situation. The evidence seems clear." Brad leaned forward in his chair. I could see the hunger in his eyes. He was already spending the money. He was already imagining the commission from selling my house. He was visualizing the nursing home room he was going to dump me in. "I need to review the financial disclosures before I make a final ruling," the judge said. "But given the medical evidence, I am inclined to grant the temporary guardianship. Mr. Moore clearly needs help." Sterling smiled. "Thank you, Your Honor. My clients just want to protect him." I looked across the aisle. Brad turned his head slightly. He looked at Jasmine. And then he did it. He winked. It was a small, quick movement, a tiny contraction of the eyelid, a signal of victory, a signal that said, "We got him. The old fool is done." He didn't think I saw it. He thought I was staring at ghosts. But I saw it. I saw the arrogance. I saw the disrespect. I saw the absolute certainty that he had won. The judge slammed his gavel. "We will reconvene in 1 hour for the final ruling after I review the asset list. Court is in recess." Brad stood up, buttoning his expensive jacket. He walked past my table. He didn't look at me. He looked at Vance. "Make sure he doesn't wander off, Vance," Brad said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We don't want to have to call a search party." Vance just smiled, a thin, tight smile. "We will be right here, Mr. Miller." They walked out of the courtroom, Brad and Jasmine, heads high, already celebrating. They were probably going to grab a champagne lunch. I waited until the doors swung shut behind them. Then I sat up. I rolled my shoulders back. I stretched my neck. The confused look vanished from my eyes, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a man who had negotiated with union bosses and corrupt city officials for 40 years. Vance leaned over to me. "You really sold that, Eli. For a second there, I thought you actually needed a doctor." I brushed a piece of lint off my old gray suit. "Did you see the wink, Vance?" I asked, my voice steady and deep. "I saw it," Vance said. "Good," I said. "He thinks the game is over. He thinks he is taking a victory lap." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a heavy leather-bound folder. It wasn't the folder of a confused old man. It was the portfolio of the architect. Inside were the real medical records from the state-certified neurologist I had seen 3 days ago. Inside were the forensic accounting reports of Brad's embezzlement. Inside was the video of them digging in my backyard like grave robbers. I handed the folder to Vance. He wants to talk about assets, I said. He wants to talk about mental capacity. Let's give him something to talk about. Vance took the folder. He looked at the weight of it. He looked at me. Are you ready for round 2, Eli? He asked. I stood up, gripping my cane, not for support, but like a weapon. I am not just ready, Vance. I am looking forward to it. Let's go introduce the judge to the real Thaddeus Moore. We walked out of the courtroom, not into the sunlight, but into the storm I was about to unleash. Brad had his hour of victory. Now he was going to have a lifetime of regret. The hour of recess passed. The courtroom filled back up. The air was stale, recycled, but to me it smelled like ozone right before a lightning strike. Brad and Jasmine walked in laughing. They were actually laughing. They looked like they had just come from a victory brunch. Brad loosened his tie as he sat down, shooting a look at the judge that screamed camaraderie. He thought they were peers. He thought they were on the same side of the line. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Walters sat down, his face grim. He looked at the file in front of him. He looked at me. Mr. Moore, the judge said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision he was about to make. I have reviewed the preliminary evidence. The medical affidavit is concerning. The video evidence is compelling. Unless there is a substantial defense to be presented, I am prepared to rule on the emergency guardianship. Sterling Brad's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket. We believe the evidence speaks for itself, Your Honor. We only ask for the court to act swiftly to protect Mr. Moore from himself. The judge nodded. Mr. Vance, do you have anything to add before I rule? Vance didn't stand up. He leaned back in his chair and gestured to me. My client would like to address the court, Your Honor. Sterling chuckled. A dry, condescending sound. Your Honor is that wise. We have already established that the respondent is confused and disoriented. This will only delay the proceedings and cause him further embarrassment. The judge looked at me. I was still slumped over, staring at the table. I will allow it, the judge said. Mr. Moore, please stand. I took a breath. I filled my lungs with the cold air of the courtroom. I stood up. I didn't struggle. I didn't use the table for leverage. I rose in one fluid motion, my spine uncoiling, my shoulders squaring. I stood to my full height, 6'2" of construction muscle that hadn't gone to fat, just to iron. I picked up the cane leaning against the table, the cane I had bought at a thrift store 3 days ago. I looked at it for a second. Then I tossed it. It clattered loudly across the floor, sliding to a stop at the feet of the bailiff. The sound rang through the room like a gunshot. Brad's head snapped up. His mouth opened. Jasmine froze. I turned to the judge. I looked him dead in the eye. The fog in my gaze was gone. The tremor in my hands was gone. Votre honneur, la justice est la reine des vertus républicaines, et elle ne doit pas être aveugle au mensonge, I said. My voice wasn't raspy. It was a baritone rumble, deep and resonant. The French rolled off my tongue as smooth as the Mississippi River. It was the language I had learned 50 years ago working the docks in New Orleans before I came north to build my empire. The judge blinked, stunned. Excuse me. I switched to English. My diction was precise. My tone was razor-sharp. I said, Your Honor, justice is the queen of Republican virtues, and it must not be blind to lies. I apologize for the theatrics, but my son-in-law seems to prefer drama over reality, so I thought I would speak a language he certainly does not understand to demonstrate that my cognitive faculties are not only intact, but operating at a level he could never hope to achieve. Brad jumped to his feet. What is this? He is faking it. Sit down, Mr. Miller, the judge barked, slamming his gavel. Mr. Moore, continue. I walked out from behind the defense table. I didn't shuffle. I strode. I paced the floor like I used to pace the boardrooms of Chicago when I was closing a deal. Mr. Sterling claims I am unable to manage my financial affairs, I said, gesturing to the opposing counsel. He claims I am destitute. Confused. Let us examine that claim with mathematics. I turned to Brad. Tell me, Bradley, what is the current capitalization rate on a multi-family commercial property in this district, given the current inflation index of 4.2%? Brad stared at me. He blinked. What? I didn't wait. It is a trick question, Bradley. Cap rates are compressed right now because of interest rate volatility, but you wouldn't know that. You are too busy leveraging client escrow accounts to cover your spread betting losses. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, in the folder Mr. Vance is holding you will not find the ravings of a madman. You will find the audited financial statements of Moore Holdings. You will see that my liquid assets exceed $12 million. You will see that my portfolio has outperformed the S&P 500 for the last 10 consecutive quarters. You will see that I do not have a mortgage, I do not have debt, and I certainly do not need a failed real estate agent to manage my checkbook. Vance handed the thick folder to the bailiff, who walked it up to the bench. The judge opened it. His eyes went wide as he looked at the numbers. He looked at the bank certifications. He looked at the tax returns. This is substantial, the judge muttered. I am not done, Your Honor, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I walked toward the plaintiff's table. I stopped right in front of Brad. He shrank back in his chair. He looked terrified. He looked like a boy who had just realized the lion wasn't sleeping. It was just waiting for him to get close enough to bite. Mr. Miller presented an affidavit from Dr. Lawrence Finch, I said, a diagnosis of advanced dementia. I pulled a single piece of paper from my inside jacket pocket. This is a subpoenaed bank record from Mr. Miller's personal account. It is dated 3 days ago. It shows a cash withdrawal of $5,000. I pulled out a second piece of paper. And this is a deposit slip from Dr. Lawrence Finch's personal account dated 45 minutes after he left my house. The amount is exactly $5,000. I slammed the papers down on the table in front of Brad. He didn't diagnose me. Your Honor, he sold me out. My son-in-law used funds embezzled from his own company to bribe a doctor who has already lost his license in 2 states to certify a healthy man as insane. The courtroom erupted. Sterling, the lawyer, looked at the papers, then looked at Brad with pure disgust. He started packing his briefcase immediately. Your Honor, I must recuse myself, Sterling said. I was not made aware of these facts. Brad stood up, his face purple. That is a lie. He is lying. He is the crazy one. Look at him. He thinks he is a millionaire. He is a truck driver. I laughed. It was a cold, hard sound. I was a truck driver, Brad. And then I was the man who owned the trucks. And then I was the man who built the roads the trucks drove on. You never bothered to ask. You never looked past the gray hair and the black skin to see the man standing in front of you. You just saw a victim. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I submit to a court-ordered medical evaluation by any state-certified neurologist of your choosing. I submit to a forensic audit of my finances. But right now I ask that you dismiss this petition with prejudice. The judge looked at Brad, who was sweating through his expensive suit. He looked at Jasmine, who was weeping silently, not for me, but for the money she just realized she had lost. Then he looked at me. He saw the architect. Petition dismissed, the judge said, slamming the gavel down so hard it echoed like a gunshot. And Mr. Miller, the judge, continued, his voice icy. You are not to leave the jurisdiction. I am forwarding these transcripts and this evidence to the district attorney's office. You are under investigation for fraud, perjury, and elder abuse. Bailiff, clear the court. I turned around. Brad was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. Jasmine was staring at me, her mouth open, trying to reconcile the father she thought she knew with the Titan standing before her. I didn't say a word to them. I buttoned my jacket. I nodded to Vance. We walked out of the courtroom. I didn't need the cane. I walked with the stride of a man who had just cleared the land and was ready to pour the foundation for a new life. The lion had roared, and the jungle was finally quiet. The banging on the front door wasn't the police this time. It was a heavy, rhythmic thud that shook the frame of the house, accompanied by the sound of a car engine idling aggressively in the driveway. I checked the monitor on my tablet. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked on the lawn, 2 wheels crushing Edda's azaleas. 2 men in leather jackets were standing on the porch. They didn't look like they were selling encyclopedias. I was sitting in the kitchen finishing a sandwich when Marcus burst into the room from the back door. He was sweating, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He had been hiding in my garage for the last 2 hours, terrified to go back to his own apartment. Dad, they are here, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. You have to help me. You have to talk to them. Tell them you are selling the house. Tell them you have the money. I chewed my food slowly. I didn't look at the door. I looked at my son. He was 42 years old, but in that moment he looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the strap. I am not selling the house, Marcus, I said calmly. And I am certainly not talking to your loan sharks. You borrowed the money. You pay it back. Please. Dad. Marcus dropped to his knees. He grabbed my hand, his palms clammy. They said they would break my legs. They said they would cut me. I owe them $50,000. Just give me the money from your secret account. I know you have it. I saw the papers in court. You have millions. 50,000 is nothing to you. It is not about the amount, I said, pulling my hand away. It is about the principle. If I pay them, you will just borrow more next week. You have a hole in your soul, son, and you are trying to fill it with chips and cards. Money won't fix you. The pounding on the door stopped. I heard heavy footsteps walking around the side of the house. They were looking for a way in. Marcus scrambled under the kitchen table, curling into a ball. He was sobbing now, a pathetic, wet sound. I stood up. I walked to the drawer where I kept the silverware, but I didn't grab a knife. I reached behind the tray and pulled out a small silver envelope. I walked back to the table and kicked Marcus's shoe. "Get up," I said. He crawled out, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "What? What are you doing?" I held out the envelope. "This is it, Marcus," I said. "This is the last lifeline, the last chance." He looked at the envelope confused. "What is in there?" "A check." "Better," I said. "It is a lottery ticket." He stared at me as if I had lost my mind. "A lottery ticket. Dad, there are killers outside and you are giving me a scratch-off." "It is a winner," I said. "I bought it yesterday at the gas station. I scratched the barcode and checked it on the app. It is worth exactly $50,000. Marcus snatched the envelope. He tore it open. Inside was a $20 scratch-off ticket, the kind with gold coins and dollar signs. He looked at it, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and a sudden frantic hope. "You are serious," he breathed. I nodded. "Go to the lottery office downtown, cash it, take the check, pay your debts. And then, Marcus, you get a job. You start over. If you do that, if you walk the straight line, maybe we can talk about the future. But if you mess this up, if you deviate 1 inch, you are on your own. Forever." Marcus didn't even say thank you. He didn't hug me. He grabbed a quarter from the table and started scratching the latex furiously. He uncovered the numbers. 5 matching symbols. The prize amount under each was $10,000. 50,000. He let out a whoop of joy, kissing the ticket. Oh my God, I am saved, I am saved." He scrambled up, clutching the ticket to his chest. He looked at the back door, then at the front where the men were waiting. "Go out the back," I said. "Jump the fence. Take my old truck. The keys are in the ignition. Go." He ran. He didn't look back at me. He didn't apologize for the mess he had brought to my doorstep. He just ran toward the money. I waited until I heard the truck start up in the alleyway. The men on the porch heard it too. They ran around the side of the house, but they were too late. Marcus was gone. I locked the back door and went back to my tablet. I hadn't lied to him. The ticket was a winner. But I hadn't bought it at a gas station. I had arranged it. I had contacts. I knew people who knew people. It was a setup, a test, a final exam to see if my son had any redemption left in his blood. I opened the tracking app. I had put a GPS tracker in the truck months ago. I watched the little blue dot move across the map. He was heading downtown. Good. The lottery office was on Main Street. I poured myself another cup of coffee and watched. The dot stopped at the lottery office. It stayed there for 45 minutes. That was about right for processing a claim of that size. Then the dot started moving again. If he was going to pay the sharks, he should have headed to the industrial district, to the warehouse where he met his bookie. Or he should have come back here to give the money to the men who were still circling my block. But the dot didn't go south. It went west. It got on the highway. It drove for 20 miles. And then it exited. I zoomed in on the map. The destination was flashing. The Golden River Casino. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. I was just tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from knowing you were right when you desperately wanted to be wrong. I switched apps on my tablet. I accessed the security feed of the casino. I knew the head of security there. I had built the parking garage for them 10 years ago. I had asked him for a favor earlier that day. There he was, Marcus. He was walking onto the casino floor, the check already cashed, a stack of high-denomination chips in his hand. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked manic. He looked like a king. He walked straight to the roulette table. I watched in silence. I watched my son take the $50,000 that was supposed to save his life, the money that was supposed to buy his freedom, and put it on black. The wheel spun. The ball bounced. Red. He lost. He didn't stop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out more chips. He put them on a number. 17. The wheel spun. 32. He lost again. I watched him for 3 hours. I watched him sweat. I watched him scream at the dealer. I watched him double down, triple down, chasing the loss, convinced that the next spin would fix everything. It was a slow-motion suicide. By midnight, he was standing at the table with empty pockets. He patted his jacket, searching for one last chip. There was nothing. $50,000. Gone. He looked around the casino, his eyes wild. He looked at the camera in the ceiling, almost as if he knew I was watching. I closed the laptop. The test was over. The result was a failure. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the private investigator. He blew it, I said. I figured the investigator replied. The loan sharks are asking around. They know he left your house. Let them find him, I said. My voice was flat. Are you sure, Eli? The investigator asked. They will hurt him. I looked at the empty chair where Etta used to sit. I thought about the 50 years of hard work that built this family. I thought about the lies, the theft, the disrespect. He had a chance, I said. He had a ticket out. He chose the wheel. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window and looked out at the night. The black SUV was gone. They had gone to hunt him down. I shook my head slowly. I had built roads, bridges, and skyscrapers. I could fix anything made of concrete and steel. But I couldn't fix a man who was broken on the inside. Marcus was on his own now. The bank of Dad was closed. Permanently. The morning after Marcus destroyed his life at the roulette wheel, the silence in my house was shattered again. I was upstairs in my office watching the monitors. I had been expecting fallout, but I wasn't expecting Brad to show up this early. He didn't look like the polished real estate agent anymore. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and there was a manic desperation in his eyes that made him dangerous. He had cornered Jordan in the kitchen. My grandson had just come in to make coffee, looking exhausted from the trauma of the previous night. He didn't know I was watching. He didn't know I had eyes in the ceiling. I turned up the volume on the audio feed. You little traitor, Brad hissed, slamming a piece of paper onto the granite countertop. It was a bank statement. I had opened a secure account for Jordan days ago with the tuition money, but in his haste, the boy must have left the welcome letter in the recycling bin at his parents' house. Brad had dug it out. Jordan backed up against the refrigerator. Uncle Brad, I can explain. Explain this, Brad shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the paper. $50,000. Opening balance. Where did you get that kind of cash? Your father is running from loan sharks because he is broke. Your mother is crying her eyes out because we are about to lose the lease on the car. And you are sitting on 50 grand. I gripped the edge of my desk. I wanted to run downstairs. I wanted to intervene, but I stayed put. Jordan had to do this. He had to sell the lie. Grandpa gave it to me, Jordan stammered, his voice trembling perfectly. It is for college. Brad let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. College. He gave you college money while the rest of us are starving. I knew it. I knew he was hoarding it. Where is the rest of it, Jordan? I don't know, Jordan said, looking down at his feet. Don't lie to me, Brad growled. He stepped closer, invading Jordan's personal space. He grabbed the front of Jordan's t-shirt. You are the mole. You have been over here every day. You are watching him. You know where he keeps it. Is it in the walls? Is it in the safe? Tell me, or so help me God. I will make sure you never see a dime of that tuition money. I will report it as stolen. I will have you arrested before you can even pack your bags. Jordan looked up. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw something else. I saw the plan clicking into place. He pushed Brad's hand away. He doesn't keep cash, Jordan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He is too paranoid for cash. He says the government tracks serial numbers. Brad froze. He took the bait instantly. Then where is it? The court records showed $12 million in liquid assets. It has to be somewhere. It is digital, Jordan said. Brad frowned. Digital. The old man doesn't even know how to use a smartphone. That is what he wants you to think. Jordan lied, spinning the web I had taught him. He was in logistics, Uncle Brad. He understands systems. Years ago, before he sold the company, he bought Bitcoin. Thousands of them, when they were worth pennies. I watched Brad's face. It went through a series of complex emotions. Confusion, disbelief, and then overwhelming, blinding greed. Bitcoin. If I had bought thousands back then, they would be worth hundreds of millions today. The number was too big for him to ignore. "Where is the wallet?" Brad asked, his voice breathless. "Where are the keys?" "He keeps it offline," Jordan said, glancing toward the hallway that led to my old study. "He calls it cold storage. He says the internet is full of thieves. He keeps everything on an old hard drive, the big beige one, in his office. He never turns it off, but he never connects it to the Wi-Fi." I leaned back in my chair upstairs and smiled. The beige box. It was an ancient computer tower sitting under my desk in the downstairs study. It was a relic from the late 90s, heavy as a cinder block coated in dust. To the untrained eye, it looked like junk. To Brad, it suddenly looked like the Holy Grail. "Show me," Brad commanded. Jordan led him out of the kitchen and down the hall. I switched camera feeds to the study. It was a room I rarely used anymore, filled with old blueprints and filing cabinets. The computer sat under the desk, its power light blinking a steady, hypnotic green. "That is it," Jordan said, pointing. Brad dropped to his knees. He looked at the machine like it was an idol. He reached out and touched the plastic casing. "Does it have a password?" Brad asked. Jordan shook his head. "I don't think so. He just turns it on and stares at the numbers. But you can't use it here. If you plug a monitor in, he might hear you. He is upstairs." Brad nodded feverishly. "You are right. We need to take it. We need to get the data off it." He reached around the back of the tower and ripped the cords out. He didn't bother unscrewing them. He just yanked until the plastic gave way. He hoisted the heavy tower into his arms, groaning under the weight. It must have weighed 30 pounds. "This stays between us, Jordan," Brad hissed, sweat dripping down his forehead. "If you tell him I took this, I will ruin you. I will tell everyone you stole the 50 grand. Do you understand?" "I understand," Jordan said, stepping back. Brad turned and practically ran out of the room, lugging the computer like a thief in the night. I heard the front door slam. I heard his car engine roar to life and speed away. I sat in my office and let out a long, low laugh. Brad thought he had just stolen a fortune in cryptocurrency. He thought he was holding the keys to the kingdom. He didn't know what was actually on that hard drive. It wasn't Bitcoin. It wasn't Ethereum. 30 years ago, before I built my empire, I had a problem with corporate espionage. Competitors were trying to hack my bidding system. So I hired a specialist to build a honeypot, a trap. It was a program designed to look like a financial database, but the moment you tried to copy files from it or connect it to a network, it acted like a biological virus. I had kept that computer as a souvenir, a reminder of the old wars. It was loaded with one of the most aggressive, nastiest pieces of malware ever written in the 90s, dormant and waiting for a connection. It was designed to spread instantly through any network it touched, corrupting databases, wiping servers, and bricking hardware. And Brad, the genius real estate agent, was about to take that digital bomb and plug it straight into his life. Jordan walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He looked up at the smoke detector and gave a small, shaky thumbs up. I picked up my phone and texted Vance. "The package has been delivered. Get the popcorn." The trap was set. Brad wasn't just going to lose his job. He was going to nuke his own career. And I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just had to wait for him to find a power cord. I sat in my leather armchair in the living room, a glass of iced tea in my hand, watching the clock on the mantel. It was 11 in the morning. Jordan had told me Brad took the computer straight to his office at Prestige Realty. Brad was arrogant. He wouldn't hire a specialist to extract the data. He would want to do it himself on the company's high-speed network so he could transfer the billions he thought were inside directly to his own secret accounts. I imagined him sitting in his glass-walled office overlooking the city, sweating with anticipation. I imagined him finding a power cord, plugging in that dusty beige tower, and connecting the Ethernet cable to the port on the wall. He probably thought he was moments away from becoming the richest man in Atlanta. He had no idea he was pulling the pin on a grenade. At 11:15, my phone buzzed. It was Vance. "It is happening, Eli." Vance said, his voice tight with excitement. "My contact at the police department just told me they got a call from Prestige Realty. They are reporting a cyber attack. A massive one." I took a sip of tea. "Tell me." Vance laughed, a short, sharp bark. Apparently, the moment Brad booted up that machine and it shook hands with their server, the worm woke up. It bypassed their firewalls like they were made of paper. It didn't just copy files, Eli. It ate them. Client lists, escrow accounts, pending contracts, 10 years of transaction history. Gone. Wiped clean. The screens in the whole building reportedly went black and then started flashing a skull and crossbones. It is a total system failure. I smiled. That was the code red virus. I had paid a hacker in '98 a lot of money for that safeguard. It was crude by modern standards, but brutal in its efficiency. And Brad, I asked. Fired, Vance said. Immediately. The CEO came down personally. They escorted him out of the building by security. He is screaming that he was set up, that it is your fault. He is threatening to sue everyone, but the CEO told him he is the one getting sued. They are going to bury him, Eli. He destroyed their business. I hung up the phone. The first domino had fallen, but I knew the game wasn't over. A man like Brad doesn't just accept defeat. He doesn't reflect on his mistakes. He lashes out. He blames the person who handed him the rope, not the fact that he tied the noose himself. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the driveway. I checked the security monitor. The cameras were recording, the sensors were active. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the old heavy revolver I kept there. I checked the chamber. It was loaded. I put it back in the drawer, but I left it unlatched. I waited. The sun went down. The streetlights flickered on. The house settled into the quiet of the night. I sent Jordan to a hotel for the night. I didn't want him to see this part. This part was between me and the wolf. At 9 o'clock, a car screeched into the driveway. It wasn't Brad's luxury sedan. It was a rental, or maybe a loaner. He must have lost the company car along with the job. I watched the monitor. Brad got out. He looked deranged. His tie was gone, his shirt was torn, and his hair was wild. He wasn't walking with that arrogant strut anymore. He was stumbling, fueled by rage and probably a bottle of scotch. He didn't come to the door to knock. He didn't ring the bell. He walked to the trunk of the car and pulled something out. It was a tire iron. He marched up the steps and smashed the glass panel of the front door. The sound of shattering glass was loud, violent. He reached in, unlocked the deadbolt, and kicked the door open. I didn't move from my chair in the living room. I sat facing the door, my hands resting calmly on the armrests. Brad stormed into the hallway. He saw me sitting there. He dropped the tire iron, but he didn't stop. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a small black pistol. It looked cheap, a Saturday night special he probably bought off the street in his desperation. He pointed the gun at my chest. His hand was shaking violently. "You ruined me," Brad screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "You old devil, you ruined my life." I looked at the gun. I looked at his eyes. They were wide and bloodshot, the eyes of a cornered rat. "I didn't ruin you, Brad," I said, my voice steady and low. "You ruined yourself. You stole a computer, you plugged it in, you let your greed drive the car, and now you are surprised you crashed." He took a step closer. The gun wavered. "Fix it," he yelled. "You have money. I know you do. You have millions. Write me a check. Right now. Write me a check for $5 million. I need to pay them back. I need to fix the servers. If you don't give me the money, I swear to God, Thad, I will put a bullet in you." He was hyperventilating. He was going to pull the trigger not because he wanted to, but because he was losing control of his own body. I leaned forward slightly. "You are not going to shoot me, Brad." "Why not?" he screamed. "I have nothing left to lose," because I said, nodding toward the window behind him. "You are already too late." Blue and red lights flooded the living room, washing over the walls, illuminating Brad's terrified face. The wail of sirens cut through the night air, loud and getting louder. "I called them the moment you turned onto the street," I said. Brad spun around, looking out the window. 3 police cruisers were blocking the driveway. Officers were already moving up the lawn, weapons drawn, tactical lights cutting through the darkness. "Drop the weapon," a voice boomed from a megaphone outside. "Come out with your hands up." Brad looked at the police, then back at me. He looked at the gun in his hand. For a second, I thought he might try to take a hostage. I thought he might try to end it right there. But Brad was a coward. He was a man who stole from old people and cheated at business. He wasn't a fighter. He dropped the gun. It hit the floor with a dull thud. He fell to his knees, putting his hands on his head, sobbing. "It is not fair," he cried. "It is not fair. You set me up." I stood up then. I walked over to him. I looked down at the man who had called me Pops, the man who had treated my daughter like a trophy and my home like a piggy bank. "I didn't set you up, Brad," I said. "I just let you be who you really are. And now the whole world knows it too." The front door burst open. Police officers swarmed the room. They grabbed Brad, slammed him to the floor, and cuffed his hands behind his back. He screamed as they dragged him out, shouting about viruses and millions of dollars, sounding like a raving lunatic. I watched him go. An officer walked over to me. He saw the broken glass. He saw the tire iron. He saw the gun on the floor. "Are you okay, Mr. Moore?" the officer asked. I looked at the empty doorway. The night air was blowing in, cool and clean. "I am fine, officer," I said. "I am just doing a little house cleaning." They took Brad away in the back of a cruiser. He was facing charges for armed burglary assault with a deadly weapon and attempted extortion. Combined with the fraud investigation from his former employer, he wasn't going to see the outside of a prison cell for a very long time. I walked to the door and closed it as best I could with the broken glass. I went back to my chair. I picked up my tea. 1 down, 2 to go. I looked at the family portrait on the wall, the one with Jasmine smiling that fake smile. "You are next, sweetheart," I whispered. The architect was done drafting. Now the demolition was in full swing. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Skyline Towers, turning the building into a glittering monument to excess. On the 42nd floor, my daughter Jasmine was waking up in what she believed was a fortress of security. She thought her husband Brad had secured the lease through his high-powered connections. She thought she was living the life of a queen because she deserved it. She didn't know that I owned the building. I bought the Skyline 10 years ago under a holding company, Moore Properties, LLC. When Brad told me he had found them a dream apartment 3 years ago, I didn't say a word. I simply called my building manager and told him to approve the lease, but to keep the owner's identity confidential. I wanted to see if they would respect the property. I wanted to see if they would pay their bills. For 3 years, I watched the payments come in. But for the last 3 months, the ledger had been red. Brad hadn't paid a dime. He had been taking the rent money, likely the money Jasmine thought he was sending, and funneling it into his gambling debts and his desperate attempts to cover his tracks at work. I sat in my study, a cup of black coffee in my hand, and looked at the eviction notice on my desk. It was standard procedure for any tenant who was 90 days delinquent. But this wasn't just any tenant. This was my daughter. I picked up the phone and dialed the building manager, Mr. Henderson. "Do it," I said. "Are you sure, Mr. Moore?" Henderson asked, his voice hesitant. "It is going to be a scene." "I am sure," I said. "Treat her like anyone else. No special treatment. If she doesn't pay, she doesn't stay." I hung up and switched the monitor to the security feed of the 42nd floor hallway. At 10 o'clock, the elevator doors opened. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped out, followed by Mr. Henderson and a crew of movers. They walked down the plush, carpeted hallway to door 42B. They knocked. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pound of the law. I watched as the door swung open. Jasmine was standing there in a silk robe holding a green smoothie. She looked annoyed. She probably thought it was a delivery driver who had forgotten the code. When she saw the uniforms, her face went pale. I couldn't hear the words through the camera, but I knew the script. I knew she was demanding to know what was going on. I knew she was invoking her husband's name, not knowing he was currently sitting in a holding cell awaiting arraignment. Henderson stepped forward. He handed her a paper. "The notice to vacate." Jasmine laughed. I saw her throw her head back. She thought it was a mistake. She pointed at the door, probably telling them to get out before she sued them. She pulled out her phone, likely trying to call Brad. But Brad didn't answer. Brad was never going to answer again. The deputies stepped inside. The reality hit her then. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an extraction. I switched the camera view to the interior of the apartment. I had installed cameras there years ago for security, long before my daughter moved in. Jasmine was screaming now. She was running around the living room, grabbing things, her designer handbags, her jewelry box. She was trying to save the symbols of her status while her life collapsed. The movers were efficient. They didn't care about her tears. They started boxing things up. They weren't packing for a move. They were clearing a property. They took the cushions off the sofa. They took the art off the walls. "Wait," I saw Jasmine mouth the words. "I paid the rent. Brad paid it." Henderson shook his head. He held up a ledger. He showed her the zeros. I saw the moment the truth broke her. She slumped against the marble island in the kitchen. She realized that her husband, the man she had chosen over her own father, had been stealing from their own home to save his skin. He had let her live in a house of cards, and now the wind had finally come. The deputies escorted her out. They didn't let her change into proper clothes. She was allowed to put on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt over her robe. She grabbed 2 suitcases, stuffing them with whatever clothes she could reach. They walked her down the hallway. The neighbors were opening their doors, peeking out. The shame was public. The humiliation was total. I switched the feed to the lobby. Jasmine walked out the front doors of the Skyline Towers, the building she thought defined her worth. She stood on the sidewalk surrounded by her Louis Vuitton bags, looking lost. Passers-by stared at her. She was the woman who had everything now, standing on the street with nothing but a dead phone and a pile of luggage. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone again. She dialed a number. My phone buzzed on the desk. I looked at the screen. Jasmine. I let it ring. I watched her on the monitor. She was crying, wiping her nose with her sleeve, begging the phone to answer. She needed Daddy to fix it. She needed Daddy to write a check. She needed the man she had ignored, insulted, and tried to institutionalize to come and save her from the consequences of her own vanity. I reached out and pressed the decline button. Then I pressed block. I watched her reaction on the screen. She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at it in disbelief. She realized then that the line was dead. The safety net was gone. She sat down on one of her suitcases right there on the concrete. She put her head in her hands. The movers brought the rest of her things down and left them on the curb. The doorman, a man she had never tipped and barely acknowledged, stood by the door looking straight ahead, ignoring her. Hours passed. The sun began to set. The city lights flickered on. Jasmine was still there. She made call after call, probably to friends who were suddenly busy, to socialite acquaintances who didn't want to be associated with a woman whose husband was in jail and who was being evicted. Eventually, she dragged her bags to her car, a white Range Rover parked on the street. She loaded them in, struggling with the weight. She got into the driver's seat. I checked the GPS tracker on her car. The fuel light was on. She had less than 10 miles of gas left. She didn't start the engine. She just sat there. I knew she had nowhere to go. The credit cards were canceled. The bank accounts were frozen. Her husband was gone. Her friends were fake. She reclined the seat. I saw the interior light flicker off. My daughter, the Princess of Cabo, the woman who couldn't be bothered to attend her mother's funeral because she needed to recharge, was going to sleep in her car on the side of the road in downtown Atlanta. I closed the laptop. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I ate it standing up, looking out at the backyard where the holes Brad had dug were still visible in the moonlight. It was a hard lesson. It was a brutal lesson. But it was the only way she would ever learn that a roof over your head is not a right. It is a privilege earned through respect and responsibility. I washed my plate. I turned off the lights. Tomorrow I had a lunch date with Marcus, and I had a feeling he was going to be even less happy than his sister. The demolition was almost complete. Only the rubble remained. I sent the text message at noon. It was short, precise, and designed to trigger the one instinct my children had left: greed. Dinner. The Capitol Grill, 7 p.m. We need to discuss the future of the estate. I knew they would come. Hunger makes a dog obedient, but the promise of money makes them punctual. I arrived at 6:55. I walked into the restaurant not as the grieving widower or the confused old man they had tried to paint me as in court. I walked in as the man who had built an empire of steel and concrete. I was wearing a bespoke Italian suit, navy blue, cut to fit my shoulders like armor. On my wrist was a Patek Philippe watch that I had kept in a safety deposit box for 20 years. I didn't use a cane. I didn't shuffle. I walked with the heavy, rhythmic stride of a lion patrolling his territory. The maitre d' knew me. He didn't know me as Thaddeus the retiree. He knew me as Mr. Moore, the silent investor who owned a significant stake in the restaurant group. "Right this way, Mr. Moore," he said, bowing slightly. "Your guests have already arrived." I followed him to the private dining area in the back. It was a raised platform visible to the rest of the restaurant, but separated by velvet ropes. A stage. Marcus and Jasmine were already sitting at the table. They looked like refugees from a life of luxury they could no longer afford. Jasmine was wearing a dress that had been expensive 2 seasons ago, but it was wrinkled, likely from being stuffed into a suitcase in the trunk of her car. Her hair was frizzy, her makeup applied with a heavy hand to cover the dark circles under her eyes. Marcus looked twitchy, his eyes darting around the room, his hands shaking slightly. He looked like a man who had lost everything because he had. When they saw me approaching, their jaws dropped. They stood up instinctively, confused by the transformation. They were looking for the frail old man in the gray cardigan. Instead, they saw a titan. Dad Jasmine breathed, her eyes scanning the suit, the watch, the way I held myself. "You look incredible. Sit down," I said. My voice was calm, authoritative. They sat. They looked at each other, then back at me. I could see the gears turning in their heads. They thought this was it. They thought I had come to my senses. They thought the suit meant I had unlocked the millions and was ready to share. They thought I was dressing up to play the role of the benevolent patriarch. I sat at the head of the table. The waiter appeared instantly. "The wine list, sir," the waiter asked. "No need," I said, not even looking at the menu. "Bring me the 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild, and 3 glasses." Marcus's eyes widened. He knew enough about money to know that bottle cost more than the car he had abandoned at the casino. "Dad," Marcus said, a nervous smile playing on his lips. This is really nice. We were so worried about you. After the court case, we thought we lost you." "We just wanted to protect you," Jasmine chimed in, her voice taking on that wheedling tone she used when she wanted a credit card limit increase. "That is all we ever wanted, to make sure you were safe." I looked at them. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched them, studying their faces like a map of my own failures. I ordered the appetizers. I ordered the steaks. I let them talk. I let them spin their webs of apologies and excuses. They blamed Brad. They blamed the stress of the funeral. They blamed the economy. They blamed everyone but themselves. When the wine arrived, the sommelier poured a small amount into my glass. I swirled it, smelled the deep notes of history and power, and took a sip. I nodded. He poured for the table. Marcus reached for his glass, his hand trembling with eagerness. "To family," he said, raising the crystal. "To starting over." I didn't raise my glass. I set it down on the white tablecloth with a soft clink. "Put the glass down, Marcus," I said. He froze. "Why? We are celebrating, aren't we?" "We are not celebrating," I said. "We are concluding business." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote control. The restaurant had a large projection screen on the far wall, usually used for corporate presentations or private events. I had arranged for it to be lowered before we arrived. "What is that?" Jasmine asked, looking at the remote. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The light from the projector cut through the dim ambiance of the restaurant, drawing the attention of every diner in the room. "Watch," I said. The video began to play. The audio boomed through the restaurant's sound system. It was the footage from my living room recorded just days ago. It showed me sitting in my armchair looking small and frail. It showed Marcus towering over me, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "You useless old man," the Marcus on the screen screamed. "You selfish, useless old man." The diners at the nearby tables stopped eating. Forks hovered in midair. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the voice of my son echoing off the walls. The video cut to the moment of violence. Marcus grabbed me by the lapels. He shook me. And then in high definition, everyone watched as he shoved his own father backward over a coffee table. They heard the sickening thud of my shoulder hitting the floor. They heard me groan in pain. Marcus turned pale. He sank into his chair, trying to make himself invisible. "Dad, turn it off," he hissed. "Please." I didn't turn it off. The video changed. Now it was the front porch of my house. It was Jasmine. She was wearing sunglasses and shouting at a stranger. $500, the Jasmine on the screen said, handing over a bundle of her mother's clothes. "And you haul this trash out of here." The video cut to the bedroom. Jasmine was tearing through drawers. She was screaming about a ring. She swallowed it, the recording of my voice said. "You are sick," the Jasmine on the screen shrieked. The video ended. The screen went black. The restaurant was dead silent. Every eye in the room was fixed on our table. I saw a woman at the next table wipe a tear from her eye. I saw a man looking at Marcus with an expression of pure disgust. Jasmine was crying, her face buried in her hands. Marcus was staring at the tablecloth, unable to look up. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. "You came here tonight because you thought I was going to save you," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "You thought the suit meant the bank was open. You thought you could charm the senile old man one last time." I leaned over the table, placing my hands flat on the cloth. "I am not senile," I said. "I am not confused. And I am certainly not your father anymore. Not in the way you want me to be." I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes. I tossed them onto the table. They landed next to the expensive wine they hadn't tasted. "Open them," I commanded. Marcus reached out with a shaking hand. He opened his envelope. He pulled out a document. It wasn't a check. It was a legal notice. "What is this?" he whispered. "It is a notice of assignment," I said. "I bought your debt, Marcus. I bought the $50,000 you owe to the loan sharks. I paid them off this morning. They were very happy to sell the note to me for 80 cents on the dollar." Marcus looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. "You paid them. Thank God. Dad, thank you. I knew you wouldn't let them hurt me." I didn't pay them to save you, I said coldly. I paid them so I could own you. I pointed at the paper. That debt is now owed to Moore Holdings. It is secured by your future earnings, your assets, and your freedom. You have missed 3 payments already. That means you are in default. I turned to Jasmine. She hadn't opened her envelope. She was just staring at me with black streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. Yours is an eviction notice, I said. But you already know about that. What you don't know is that the document inside is a bill for damages, for the items you sold, for the emotional distress, for the destruction of property. I straightened up. I looked around the restaurant. I looked at the people judging my children. I am not your savior, I said. I am your creditor, and I am calling in the debt. Marcus stood up. Dad, you can't do this. I don't have the money. If I don't pay, what happens? I looked him in the eye. The same thing that happens to any man who steals and squanders. You face the consequences. I signaled the waiter. Check, please, I said. I paid for the wine. I paid for the steaks they hadn't eaten. I tipped the staff generously. Then I turned to my children one last time. Enjoy the wine, I said. It is the last thing I will ever buy you. I walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see their faces. I knew what they looked like. They looked like people who had finally met reality. The lion had fed, and now he was done playing with his food. You thought the dinner was the end of the show, but it was merely the intermission. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, the valet already holding the door of the black town car I had hired for the evening. I didn't look back, but I heard the heavy footsteps pounding on the pavement behind me. Dad, wait! Marcus screamed, his voice ragged, stripped of all its usual arrogance. Dad, please, you can't just walk away. I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I adjusted my cufflinks. I took a breath of the city air, which tasted like exhaust and opportunity. Then I turned. Marcus was standing under the awning of the restaurant. He looked small. The expensive suit I had bought him for his birthday last year hung off his frame as if he had shrunk in the wash. His face was pale slick with sweat despite the chill. He held the legal notice I had thrown on the table in a crumpled fist. Get in the car, I said. He blinked, confused. What? I opened the back door of the town car. Get in. We're going to finish this conversation where the neighbors won't call the police on you for public indecency. You are making a scene. Marcus hesitated, looking back at the restaurant where his sister was likely still sobbing into a napkin. Then he looked at the dark interior of the car. He saw it as a lifeboat. He scrambled inside. I slid in next to him and tapped the glass. The driver pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the traffic. The interior was silent, insulated from the noise of the world by heavy glass and expensive leather. Marcus turned to me, his eyes wide and pleading. Dad, about the debt. You said you bought it. That means I don't owe the sharks anymore, right? That means I am safe. I looked at him. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a rescue mission. You are safe from having your legs broken in an alley, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. But you are not safe from the debt. You owe $50,000 plus interest, and you owe it to a creditor who knows exactly where you sleep. But you are my dad, he whined. You have millions. 50 grand is nothing to you. Why are you doing this? It isn't just the 50 grand, Marcus. I reached into the leather pocket of the car door and pulled out a second envelope. This one was blue. I tossed it onto his lap. Open it. He opened it with trembling fingers. He pulled out a stack of photocopies. His eyes scanned the first page, and I saw the blood drain from his face until he looked like a ghost. These are credit card applications, I said. 3 of them. All approved in the last 6 months. All of them taken out in the name of Etta Moore. Marcus stopped breathing. You opened credit cards in your dead mother's name while she was dying in the hospital, I said. My voice was soft, but it filled the car like smoke. You used her social security number. You used her maiden name. You maxed them out on online gambling and bottle service. That is identity theft, Marcus. That is wire fraud. That is a federal crime. He started to shake. Dad, I was going to pay it back. I just needed a bridge loan. I thought once the inheritance came through... You thought you were stealing from a corpse, I interrupted. You thought she wouldn't notice because she was in the ground. You desecrated her memory for chips. I leaned forward. I spoke to the district attorney this morning. Vance set up the meeting. I showed him these papers. I showed him the tracking data from your car that placed you at the casino. I showed him the footage of you assaulting me in my living room. Marcus dropped the papers. He grabbed my arm. Dad, no. You didn't. You wouldn't send your own son to prison. I pulled my arm away. I didn't send you anywhere yet. But the paperwork is drafted. The charges are ready to be filed. Elder abuse, identity theft, grand larceny. If I sign the affidavit, you are looking at 15 years in a federal penitentiary. You will be an old man when you get out. Marcus started to cry. It was a messy, ugly sound. He buried his face in his hands, rocking back and forth. I can't go to jail. I can't. I wouldn't survive in there. Please, Dad. I will do anything. I will go to rehab. I will get a job. Just don't send me to jail. I watched him. I felt a pang of sorrow, a deep ache for the little boy who used to sit on my lap and steer the truck. But that boy was gone. This was a man who needed to be broken before he could be fixed. There is another option, I said. He looked up, hope flaring in his wet eyes like a match in a dark room. What? Anything. I will do it. I tapped on the partition glass. The driver handed me a glossy brochure through the gap. I handed it to Marcus. It wasn't a brochure for a rehab center in Malibu with ocean views and yoga classes. It was a pamphlet for a heavy machinery camp in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. More infrastructure still has contacts up north, I said. I made a call to an old foreman of mine, a man named Biggs. He runs a pipeline maintenance crew. It is brutal work, Marcus. 12 hours a day, 40 degrees below zero. You sleep in a container. You eat what they feed you. There is no internet. There is no cell service. There are no casinos. Marcus looked at the pictures of snow ice and men in heavy gear welding pipes in a blizzard. Alaska, he whispered. You want to send me to Alaska? I am not sending you, I corrected him. I am offering you a job. You sign a contract today. 2 years, your wages will be garnished 100%. 50% goes to pay back the debt you owe me. The other 50% goes into a trust for your son Jordan so he can go to college and not end up like you. 2 years, Marcus gasped. Dad, I will freeze to death. I have never done manual labor in my life. Then you will learn, I said. You will learn what it feels like to earn $1 instead of stealing it. You will learn what the cold feels like. You will learn what silence sounds like. And if I say no, he asked, his voice trembling. Then I tap on this glass, the driver takes us to the police station, and I hand over the evidence, I said. Those are the choices. Option A is prison. You get a seller record, and you lose your son forever. Option B is the ice. You work hard, you pay your debts, and maybe, just maybe, you come back a man Jordan can look in the eye. The car stopped. We weren't at the police station. We were at a private airfield on the outskirts of the city. Through the window, I could see a small Cessna sitting on the tarmac, its propellers already spinning. The plane is waiting, I said. It leaves in 20 minutes. Biggs is expecting you. Marcus looked out the window at the plane. He looked at the brochure. He looked at me. He realized this wasn't a negotiation. This was an execution of his old life. He slid off the leather seat and fell to his knees on the floor of the car. It was a tight space, but he managed to prostrate himself. He grabbed my hand and kissed it, his tears wetting my skin. Please, Dad, he sobbed. Don't make me go. I am scared. I am so scared. I looked down at the top of his head. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't comfort him either. Fear is good, I said. Fear keeps you awake. Fear makes you careful. You have spent your whole life being comfortable, Marcus. Comfort made you weak. I checked my Patek Philippe watch. The second hand swept around the dial with relentless precision. You have 1 minute, Marcus, I said, my voice cold as the Alaskan wind. Make your choice, prison or the pipeline. 60 seconds. He looked up at me. He saw the stone in my face. He saw the father who had finally stopped catching him. I will go, he whispered. I will go to Alaska. Good choice, I said. I opened the door. The noise of the airplane engine flooded the car. Get out! Marcus stumbled out of the car. He stood on the tarmac shivering in his expensive suit, looking lost and small against the night sky. "Don't come back until the debt is paid," I shouted over the roar of the engine. He turned and walked toward the plane, his head hung low. I watched him climb the stairs. I watched the door close. I watched the plane taxi down the runway and lift off into the darkness, carrying my son toward the frozen edge of the world. I sat back in the seat and closed my eyes. I felt a single tear track down my cheek. It wasn't for him. It was for me. Because I knew that to save him I had to break my own heart. But the debt was called in, and now the work could begin. I watched the taillights of the car carrying Marcus fade into the distance, headed for the airfield and a frozen exile in Alaska. The silence of the night returned heavy and absolute, but my work was not yet finished. I tapped on the partition glass and told the driver to take me back to the restaurant. I knew Jasmine would still be there. She had nowhere else to go. When the town car pulled up to the curb, she was sitting on a bench under a street lamp, shivering in the cool night air. Her makeup was streaked down her cheeks like war paint gone wrong. Her expensive dress, now wrinkled and stained, looked like a costume from a play that had closed early. She looked up as the car approached, her eyes lighting up with a desperate, pathetic hope. She thought I had come back to save her. She thought the Bank of Dad had reopened for business. I rolled down the window. She scrambled off the bench and ran to the car, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement. "Dad," she gasped, grabbing the door handle. "Thank God you came back. I knew you wouldn't leave me here. I knew you wouldn't let your daughter sleep on the street. Marcus is crazy, Dad. He gambled everything away. But I didn't do anything. I was just trying to be a good wife. I was a victim, too." I listened to her lies. They spilled out of her mouth like oil, slick and toxic. She was still trying to manipulate me. She was still trying to play the innocent princess caught in a storm she helped create. She hadn't learned a thing. I unlocked the door, but I didn't let her in. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I towered over her. "You were not a victim, Jasmine," I said, my voice flat. "You were the architect of your own disaster. You sold your mother's clothes for pocket change. You tried to dig up her grave for a ring that wasn't there. You conspired to put me in a home so you could sell mine. Do not insult my intelligence by playing the martyr." She flinched, but her desperation was stronger than her shame. "Okay, fine," she sobbed. "I made mistakes. I was greedy. I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. But please, I have nothing. Brad is in jail. My cards are declined. My car is out of gas. I need money. Just enough for a hotel. Just enough to get back on my feet. Please. $5,000. That is all I ask. $5,000. The exact amount she had spent on a single weekend in Cabo while her mother was dying. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I am not going to give you money, Jasmine," I said. Her face fell, her lower lip trembling. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Starve." I handed her the envelope. "I am going to give you an opportunity," I said. She snatched the envelope, tearing it open with frantic fingers. She was expecting cash. She was expecting a check. She was expecting a deed to a condo. She pulled out the papers. She stopped. She stared at them in the dim light of the street lamp. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking with confusion and rising anger. "It is an application," I said. She looked closer. It was a standard employment form for the Moore Hospitality Group, the parent company of the restaurant we had just eaten at, and dozens of others across the state. The position listed at the top was typed in bold letters. "Server assistant." "Busboy," she spat. "You want me to be a busboy?" I pointed to the restaurant behind us. "I own this chain, Jasmine," I said. "I own the building. I own the kitchen. And I am offering you a job. Minimum wage plus tips. You start at the bottom. You clean tables. You sweep floors. You wash dishes. You learn what it feels like to serve others instead of expecting to be served." She looked at me with pure horror. "I am a Moore," she shrieked. "I have a degree in art history. I am not going to scrub plates for a living. This is humiliating." "It is honest work," I said, my voice hardening. "It is the kind of work your grandmother did to put food on the table. It is the kind of work I did before I built the company." I stepped closer to her. "Here's the deal, Jasmine. You take the job. You show up on time every day. You work hard. You don't use my name. You don't ask for special treatment. You live on what you earn. If you can last 6 months, if you can prove to me that you have humility and grit, then we will talk. Then maybe I will help you with a down payment on an apartment, but not a penny before then." She stared at the application. Her hands were shaking with rage. She felt entitled to my fortune. She felt entitled to my protection. She couldn't conceive of a world where she had to sweat for her survival. "You are a monster," she screamed. She crumpled the papers in her fist. "You are a cruel, vindictive old man. I hate you. I hate you." She threw the ball of paper at my chest. It bounced off my lapel and fell into the gutter. "I am not doing this," she yelled, her face twisted and ugly. "I will never work for you. I would rather die." I looked at the paper in the gutter. I looked at my daughter. "Then you have made your choice," I said. I turned back to the car. I opened the door and slid into the leather seat. "Wait!" she screamed, realizing I was actually leaving. "Dad, wait. Where are you going? What about me?" I rolled down the window halfway. I looked at her standing on the curb alone in the city with nothing but her pride and her empty suitcase. "Good luck on the streets, sweetheart," I said. I signaled the driver. The car pulled away smoothly into the traffic. I didn't watch her in the rearview mirror. I knew what she was doing. She was screaming. She was crying. She was blaming everyone but herself. But tonight, she would have to find a place to sleep without my credit card. Tonight, she would be cold. And maybe, just maybe, the cold would finally wake her up. 2 down. I took a deep breath. The silence in the car was heavy, but it was clean. I had one more piece of business to attend to. My grandson, Jordan, the only one who hadn't broken my heart. I needed to make sure Darnell didn't drag the boy down with him before the plane landed in Alaska. "Driver," I said, "take me to the warehouse." The town car glided through the industrial district, the streetlights flickering overhead like dying stars. We pulled up to the old warehouse where Marcus had been renting a small office space, a place he used to hide from his creditors and pretend he was running a business. I knew Jordan was there. It was the only place he felt safe, surrounded by the inventory of a failed life. I told the driver to wait. I walked up the metal stairs to the second floor, my footsteps echoing on the grate. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room was dim lit only by a single desk lamp. Jordan was there. He was frantically stuffing clothes into a duffel bag. He looked terrified, his eyes red, his hands shaking as he folded shirts and threw them in. He looked like a soldier preparing for a war he didn't understand. "Jordan," I said, stepping into the light. He jumped, dropping a pair of jeans. "Grandpa, I didn't hear you come in." "What are you doing, son?" I asked, looking at the bag. "I have to go," he said, his voice trembling. "Dad called me, right before he got on the plane. He used the pilot's phone. He said I have to come with him. He said he needs me in Alaska. He said he needs someone to cook for him, to handle his schedule, to help him get set up." I felt a surge of rage that was different from what I felt for Marcus. This was a protective rage. Marcus was going to a penal colony of his own making, and even in his final moments of freedom, he tried to drag his son down into the pit with him. He didn't want a son. He wanted a servant. He wanted a crutch. "He said if I don't come, he will die out there," Jordan whispered. "He said I am the only one who can keep him alive." I walked over to the desk. I put my hand on the duffel bag, stopping Jordan's frantic packing. "Your father is a grown man, Jordan," I said firmly. "If he dies, it is because he refused to live. It is not your job to keep his heart beating." "But he is my dad," Jordan said, tears spilling over. "He says I owe him." "You don't owe him a damn thing," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the final envelope of the night. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a contract. "Do you remember this?" I asked, sliding the document onto the desk. Jordan looked at it. He wiped his eyes. "Yeah. We signed it 3 days ago. In the garage. It was a declaration of financial guardianship and educational support. It was a legal document stating that Jordan, at 19 years of age, had voluntarily designated me as his primary benefactor and financial guardian. It meant that for all intents and purposes, his fiscal life was tied to mine, not his father's. I picked up the paper. "This document says that you are under my protection," I said. "It says that your tuition, your housing, and your future are secured by the Moore Trust. It also says that you have agreed to complete your education and maintain a grade point average." I looked him in the eye. "If you get on a plane to Alaska, you violate this contract. You lose the college fund. You lose the future. And you become just another guy working on a pipeline for a man who will never appreciate you." Jordan looked at the bag. He looked at the contract. He was torn between the guilt his father had planted in him and the freedom I was offering. "He just wants someone to blame when things get hard," I said softly. He wants you there so he can yell at you instead of looking in the mirror. Do not give him that satisfaction. Jordan let go of the bag. He slumped into the desk chair, burying his face in his hands. I don't want to go, he sobbed. I hate the cold. I want to go to school. I want to be an engineer. Then be an engineer, I said. I picked up the duffel bag and turned it upside down. The clothes tumbled out onto the floor. Unpack, I said. We are leaving. Where are we going? He asked, looking up. Home, I said. My home. Your home. We walked out of the warehouse, leaving the ghosts of his father's failures behind in the dark. The ride back to my house was quiet. Jordan fell asleep against the window, exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the last 24 hours. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. The lights were on. It didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a sanctuary. I woke Jordan up. Come on, son, we have work to do. We walked inside. I led him straight through the kitchen, past the living room where his father had assaulted me, and out the back door to the garage. I unlocked the door and flipped the switch. The fluorescent lights buzzed to life, illuminating the 1969 Pontiac GTO, the Judge. It sat there gleaming and powerful, a machine built for speed and endurance. It was missing a carburetor. The transmission needed tuning. The interior needed to be stitched. I walked over to the tool chest and pulled out a set of wrenches. I handed a 9/16 to Jordan. You said you wanted to be an engineer, I said. Jordan looked at the wrench. He looked at the car. A slow smile spread across his face, chasing away the shadows of fear. Yes, sir, he said. Then let's get to work, I said. We have a lot of fixing to do. We spent the rest of the night under the hood grease on our hands, the smell of oil and gasoline filling the air. We didn't talk about Marcus. We didn't talk about Jasmine. We talked about torque and horsepower. We talked about how to build something that lasts. For the first time in a long time, the lion wasn't fighting alone. He had a cub. And together we were going to build a legacy that no one could ever tear down. The for sale sign in the front yard didn't even have time to rust. I priced the house to move $500,000 cash as is. It was a steal in this market, especially for a property with a foundation as solid as the one I poured myself 40 years ago. But I didn't care about the market value. I cared about the exorcism. The buyers were a young couple, a teacher and a mechanic with a baby on the way and stars in their eyes. When they walked through the front door, they didn't see the spot where Marcus had shoved me. They didn't see the dining table where Brad had tried to steal my life with a fountain pen. They just saw a home. They saw a future. I signed the deed over to them on the kitchen island, the ink drying faster than my children's tears ever did. Vance was standing next to me holding the cashier's check. It was a heavy piece of paper. $500,000. To my children, this check was the holy grail. It was the solution to every mistake they had ever made. It was the ticket back to the country club. I took the check from Vance. I didn't fold it. I didn't put it in my wallet. Deposit this immediately, I said, my voice echoing in the empty kitchen. Into the main holding account, Vance asked. No, I said. Put it into the charity account. The Ruby Moore Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors. Every single cent. Vance nodded, a small grim smile playing on his lips. He knew what this meant. It wasn't just a donation. It was a message. It was a scorched earth policy written in numbers. Do you want to make an announcement? Vance asked. I do, I said. Put it in the paper. Put it online. Make sure the whole city knows that Eda's memory is going to help people who actually appreciate it. The news hit the wire 2 hours later. I was in the backyard standing by the fire pit I had built from river stones when my phone started vibrating. It wasn't a call. It was a barrage of notifications. Jasmine had seen it. She must have been on her break at the restaurant checking her phone with blistered fingers hoping for a miracle. Instead, she found a press release. I watched the voicemail icon appear. I didn't answer the call, but I listened to the message. Dad, you can't do this, she screamed, her voice distorted by the poor reception and her own hysteria. That is our money. That is the house we grew up in. You gave $500,000 to strangers. You are sick. You are doing this just to hurt us. I am your daughter. I am living in a motel. How could you burn our inheritance like that? She still didn't get it. She thought the money was hers by divine right. She thought my lifetime of labor was her birthright to squander. She didn't see the donation as an act of charity. She saw it as a theft from her own pocket. I deleted the message. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a cold, final clarity. Then came the email from the lawyer representing Brad in his criminal defense. It was a formal notice, but the subtext was panic. They had been counting on a settlement, counting on me softening up and using the house money to make the fraud charges go away. Now they knew the war chest was empty. Brad was going to have to face the judge with empty pockets. And Marcus, he couldn't call me. He was on a plane somewhere over the Yukon, stripped of his phone, heading toward a frozen hell where money meant nothing and survival meant everything. But I knew that when he eventually found out, when the news reached him in the sub-zero darkness of the work camp, it would break whatever entitlement was left in his soul. They were mad. They were desperate. They were realizing that the bridge wasn't just burned, it had been detonated. I turned my attention to the fire pit. A small flame was already dancing on the kindling. I held a stack of photographs in my hand. They were the family portraits that used to hang in the hallway, the ones we took at Sears when the kids were small, the ones from graduations and weddings. I looked at the top photo. It was the group shot from last Thanksgiving. We were all smiling. Etta looked tired but happy, sitting in the middle. Marcus had his hand on my shoulder, a Rolex I didn't know he couldn't afford, glinting on his wrist. Jasmine was looking at her phone, barely present. Brad was smirking at the camera like he owned the room. It was a lie, a glossy, framed lie. I tossed the photo into the fire. The flames curled around the edges, bubbling the plastic coating. I watched Marcus's face melt. I watched Brad's smirk turn into black smoke. I watched the illusion of the happy family disintegrate into ash. I threw them in one by one, the wedding photos, the birthday shots. The evidence of a life I thought I had built, but had actually just been financing. I felt lighter with every picture that burned. The heavy weight on my chest, the weight that had been there since the funeral, started to lift. I wasn't erasing my past. I was purifying it. I was removing the parasites from the history books. When the last of the fake smiles had turned to dust, I reached into my inside pocket. I pulled out a small leather wallet. Inside there were only 2 photos protected by plastic. One was of Etta, taken 40 years ago on our honeymoon. She was laughing, her hair blowing in the wind, looking at me with a love that was fierce and real. The other was of Jordan and me, taken 3 days ago in the garage, standing in front of the restored GTO. We were both covered in grease. We weren't smiling for the camera. We were just standing together, shoulder to shoulder, 2 men ready to work. I rubbed my thumb over Etta's face. "I did it, honey," I whispered to the flames. "I cleaned the house. I put the wallet back in my pocket, close to my heart." Jordan walked out the back door. He was carrying 2 duffel bags. He stopped when he saw the fire dying down. He looked at the empty frames on the grass. He knew what I had done. He didn't ask why. He didn't mourn the loss of the photos. He just nodded. "The RV is packed, Grandpa," he said. "The tanks are full." I kicked dirt over the embers of the fire, smothering the last of the heat. The house behind us was empty now. It was just wood and brick. It belonged to someone else. "Good," I said. I turned my back on the house, on the memories, on the ashes of my children's greed. "Let's go, Jordan," I said. "We have a lot of road ahead of us." We walked around the side of the house to the driveway where the massive gleaming RV was waiting. It was a beast of a machine, a land yacht designed for freedom. I climbed into the driver's seat. Jordan climbed into the passenger side. I started the engine. It purred with a deep, powerful rumble. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as we pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look at the for sale sign being taken down. I looked forward through the windshield at the endless ribbon of highway stretching out toward the horizon. My children were in my past. My grandson was my future. And for the first time in a long time, the lion was free to roam. The morning sun glinted off the chrome bumper of the machine sitting in my driveway, transforming the space where my old rusted sedan used to park into a launch pad for a new life. It was a Prevost H345, a 45-foot custom motor coach painted a deep midnight black. It had cost $1.2 million, paid for with a single wire transfer from the trust fund my children had tried so desperately to steal. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a rolling fortress of luxury equipped with marble floors, Italian leather furniture, and an engine powerful enough to climb mountains without breaking a sweat. For 15 years, I had denied myself every comfort. I had lived in the shadows of my own wealth, eating discount tuna and driving a car that rattled at 50 miles per hour, all to teach a lesson that no one wanted to learn. I had worn the mask of the humble retiree until it had almost fused to my skin. But today, the mask was gone. The gray suit was gone. I was wearing a pair of raw denim jeans, a fitted white t-shirt, and a leather jacket that smelled of new beginnings. I walked around the perimeter of the RV, running my hand along the smooth, cold metal. It felt solid. It felt permanent. It felt like the freedom I had promised Etta we would one day have, a promise I was finally keeping, even if I had to do it alone. Jordan came out of the house carrying the last box of tools. He stopped when he saw me, a grin spreading across his face. He looked different than the scared boy who had huddled in the warehouse just days ago. He stood straighter. His eyes were clear. He looked like a young man who had just realized the world was wide open. "She is gassed up and ready," Grandpa Jordan said, hoisting the box into the massive storage bay underneath the bus. "I checked the tire pressure. I checked the oil. We are good to go." I nodded. "Good work, son. Did you pack the maps?" Jordan tapped his head. "GPS is programmed, but I have the paper atlas in the cab. Just like you said, you can't trust a satellite in the desert." I smiled. He was learning. He was listening. We climbed up the steps into the cabin. The air conditioning was humming a soft, cool breeze that smelled of cedar and leather. I sat in the driver's seat. It felt like a throne. The dashboard was lit up with digital gauges and navigation screens. It was a long way from the steering wheel of a dump truck, but the feeling of control was the same. I looked out the massive windshield. I could see the street where I had raised my family. I could see the cracks in the sidewalk where Darnell had learned to skate. I could see the tree where Jasmine had hung her tire swing. I felt a pang of nostalgia, sharp and sudden, but it passed quickly, replaced by the dull ache of reality. Those memories belonged to a different man, a father who thought love was enough to save his children. That man was gone. I reached for the ignition, but before I could press the button, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It wasn't a text. It was a call. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a photo I hadn't changed in years. It was Jasmine. I stared at it. My finger hovered over the decline button. I knew I should ignore it. I knew there was nothing left to say. But a part of me, perhaps the last remnant of that foolish father, needed to hear it. I needed to hear the desperation one last time to make sure I wasn't making a mistake. I answered. I didn't say hello. I just held the phone to my ear. Daddy Jasmine's voice came through the speaker. It wasn't the screeching harpy from the street corner. It wasn't the arrogant socialite from the country club. It was a voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, a tone she hadn't used since she was 6 years old, asking for a pony. "Daddy, I am so glad you picked up," she cooed, the falsehood coating every syllable like cheap syrup. "I have been doing so much thinking. I know things got heated. I know we all said things we didn't mean. But I am at a hotel downtown and I was looking at old photos of Mom, and I just realized how silly this all is. We are family, Daddy. We shouldn't be fighting over money. I want to come home. I want to take care of you. I can cook for you. I can clean. We can start over. Just you and me." I listened to the pause, the silence where she waited for me to cave. She thought I was stupid. She thought that because I was old I would be lonely. She thought that if she pitched her voice high enough and used the word family enough times, I would forget that she tried to dig up her mother's corpse for a diamond ring. She didn't know about the RV. She didn't know about Jordan. She didn't know that I had already sold the house she wanted to return to. "Daddy, are you there?" she asked, a hint of panic cracking the veneer of sweetness. "Please, I don't have anywhere else to go. My cards aren't working. Brad isn't answering. I need you." I looked at Jordan. He was sitting in the passenger seat watching me. He knew who it was. He didn't say anything. He just waited. I took the phone away from my ear. I looked at the device. It was a tether. It was a leash that connected me to a past I had just incinerated. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an argument. I didn't give her the closure of a goodbye. With my thumb, I popped the side tray of the phone, the tiny microchip, the SIM card that held my number. My contacts and my connection to their toxicity slid out into my palm. The call cut off instantly. The voice was gone. I rolled down the driver's side window. The morning air rushed in. I held the SIM card between my thumb and forefinger. It was such a small thing to hold so much pain. I flicked my wrist. The chip spun through the air, catching the sunlight for a brief second before disappearing into the storm drain at the end of the driveway. I rolled the window up. The cabin was silent again, save for the low hum of the electronics. I looked at Jordan. "Ready?" I asked. He nodded, a grin breaking across his face. "Ready." I pressed the engine's start button. The massive diesel motor roared to life beneath us, a deep guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. It sounded like power. It sounded like a lion clearing its throat. I released the air brakes. The hiss was sharp and final. I shifted the beast into drive. The RV lurched forward, smooth and heavy. We rolled down the driveway, the tires crushing the gravel one last time. I turned the wheel, guiding the massive vehicle onto the street. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look at the house that was no longer mine. I didn't think about the woman sleeping in her car downtown, or the man shivering in a bunk in Alaska. I looked at the road ahead. It was gray and endless, stretching out toward the horizon. We had 50 states to see. We had oceans to cross and mountains to climb. We had a whole world to explore, and for the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to ask anyone for permission. I pressed the accelerator. The engine surged. "We are going west, Jordan," I said, my voice strong and clear. "West is good," he replied. We drove past the city limits sign. We drove past the exit for the cemetery. We drove past the past. The lion was loose, and he was never going back to the cage. The air in Montana tastes different than it does in Atlanta. It tastes like cold iron and pine needles sharp enough to wake you up without a drop of coffee. I stood waist-deep in the rushing waters of the Bitterroot River, the current tugging at my waders like a persistent child. The sun was just cresting over the Sapphire Mountains, painting the sky in strokes of violent violet and burning orange. It was 6 months to the day since I had driven out of my driveway, leaving the wreckage of my old life in the rearview mirror. 6 months. It felt like 6 lifetimes. I cast my line. The fly danced on the surface of the water, a tiny speck of artifice against the raw power of nature. Next to me, Jordan was doing the same. He didn't look like the scared, skinny kid who had huddled in a warehouse packing a duffel bag anymore. The mountain air had filled out his chest. The hard work of maintaining the RV and setting up camp every night had put muscle on his arms. He was quiet, focused, reading the river instead of a smartphone screen. I waded back to the bank and sat on a large, flat rock. I pulled my tablet from my waterproof vest. We had a satellite connection out here, a thin digital thread connecting us to the world we had left behind. I opened my email. Vance had sent the weekly report. I scrolled to the bottom past the investment returns and the trust fund dividends to the section labeled Status Update. There was a mugshot attached. It was Brad. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit anymore. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was shaved close to his scalp. His eyes looked hollow. 5 years, the caption read. Fraud, embezzlement, witness tampering. I looked at the face of the man who had tried to commit me to an asylum. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel the thrill of vengeance. I just felt a deep, settling peace. It was the feeling of a job finished. The law had done what I couldn't. It had stripped him of his pretenses and forced him to live in a cell the size of his old walk-in closet. He wanted a free ride. Now he had free room and board for half a decade. I swiped to the next update. It wasn't a mugshot. It was a grainy photo taken by one of the investigators I kept on retainer, just to ensure my children didn't starve, but also didn't slide back into their old ways. It was Jasmine. She was wearing a red vest over a white polo shirt. She was standing behind a register at a grocery store chain on the outskirts of Atlanta. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup. She was scanning a gallon of milk for a customer who looked impatient. My daughter, the art history major, the socialite, was ringing up groceries. I zoomed in on her face. She looked tired. She looked older, but she also looked focused. There was no arrogance in her posture. She was working. She was standing on her own 2 feet for 8 hours a day, earning a paycheck that barely covered her rent in the studio apartment she now lived in. She hadn't called me in 3 months. The last time we spoke, she didn't ask for money. She just told me she was tired. That was good. Tired is good. Tired means you are building muscle. Tired means you are finally carrying your own weight. I swiped again. The last update. Alaska. There was no photo, just a scanned letter from Biggs, the foreman at the Prudhoe Bay camp. He is still here. Eli, the letter read. He almost quit the first week. Cried when the temperature dropped to 50 below. But I put him on the welding crew. He is learning. He keeps his head down. He sends his paycheck to the trust account every Friday. He hasn't missed a shift in 4 months. Marcus. My son. The gambler. The man who bet his life on black and lost. He was out there in the ice, and the dark welding steel pipes together, while the wind howled like a banshee. He was suffering. I knew he was suffering. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't running away from it. He was enduring it. He was paying his debt dollar by frozen dollar. I turned off the tablet and slid it back into my vest. The wind picked up, rustling the aspen trees along the riverbank. I took a deep breath. I wasn't a father who abandoned his children. I was a father who finally loved them enough to let them break. I had to let them shatter so they could put themselves back together without the glue of my money. Brad was broken by the law. Jasmine was broken by humility. Marcus was broken by labor. And out of those broken pieces, maybe, just maybe, real people were starting to form. I looked over at Jordan, his rod bent sharply. "I got one, Grandpa," he shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Reel him in, son," I called back. "Keep the tension. Don't let him run." I watched him fight the trout. He moved with instinct now. He didn't panic. He played the line, letting the fish tire itself out before guiding it into the net. He held up the shimmering rainbow trout, grinning from ear to ear. It was a trophy, not bought, but caught. "Nice catch," I said, walking over to him. He released the hook and lowered the fish back into the water. We watched it dart away into the current. Jordan wiped his hands on his waders. He looked at me, then at the mountains. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The big house, the city." I looked south toward where Atlanta lay, thousands of miles away. I thought about the empty rooms, the silence, the ghosts of the people my children used to be. "No," I said. "I miss your grandmother. But I don't miss the house. A house is just a box you keep your things in." This... I gestured to the river, the sky, the RV parked in the clearing behind us. "This is living." Jordan nodded. He looked at the map spread out on the rock. "Where to next?" he asked. "We have done the Dakotas. We have done Montana." I looked at the map. The road stretched out in every direction, a web of possibilities. "Oregon," I said. "I want to see the Pacific Ocean. I want to stand on the edge of the continent and know that I made it all the way." Jordan smiled. "Oregon sounds good." He started packing up the gear. I watched him. He was the only inheritance I had left that mattered. He wasn't waiting for me to die. He was living with me. He was learning how to fix engines, how to read a map, how to catch a fish. He was learning how to be a man who didn't need a safety net. I walked back to the RV. The black paint was covered in dust from the road, a badge of honor. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled of coffee and cedar. It smelled like home. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, steady thrum that vibrated through the soles of my boots. Jordan climbed into the passenger seat. He buckled his seatbelt and opened the atlas. "Ready, Grandpa?" he asked. I released the parking brake. I put the beast in gear. I looked at the river one last time. I thought about Brad in his cell. I thought about Jasmine scanning milk. I thought about Marcus in the snow. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just free. I looked at Jordan and smiled. The smile felt good. It felt real. "It is time to go, nephew," I said, using the term of endearment my own grandfather had used for me. "Life is long, and we have a lot of miles left to run." I pressed the gas. The RV lurched forward, gravel crunching under the tires. We pulled onto the asphalt, the road singing beneath us. The lion wasn't just roaring anymore. He was hunting. He was hunting for the next sunrise, the next horizon, the next moment of peace. We drove west into the light, leaving the shadows where they belonged. In the past, we spent our lives building shelters for our children, hoping to protect them from the rain. But sometimes, in our desire to give them everything, we rob them of the ability to build their own roofs. I learned that allowing your children to suffer the consequences of their greed is not cruelty. It is the highest form of parenting. Respect is the currency of family, and once it is spent, no amount of money can buy it back. Walking away was not abandoning them. It was finally choosing to honor myself and the legacy my wife and I built. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the truth about family and resilience. Until next time, keep your head up and your boundaries strong.